Hello guys, tonight you're invited to drift away through the softly flickering haze of candlelight and the distant far-off clang of iron against wood. We're going on a gentle but grim journey tonight, through the corridors of medicine, as it was in the 1800s. If you're listening right now, leave a comment with your time and where you're tuning in from. I'd love to know what part of the world you're cozying up in for tonight's journey. I read every one of them, and it's strangely comforting to see all the sleepy souls gathered together from every corner of the globe. Now, get comfortable. Pull the blanket up just a little higher, let your body relax into the bed, the couch, or wherever you've chosen to rest. This story moves slowly, like the turning of a rusted wheel, or the creaking of a carriage on wet cobblestones. You won't need to do anything except listen and imagine. Tonight, you are not who you are. Tonight, you are a young apprentice surgeon, stepping cautiously into the world of 19th century medicine. The year is 1823, and you have just arrived in London, a city of gas lamps, horse hooves, and alleyways slick with filth. You've come to learn the trade, but you will soon learn this is not the medicine of antiseptics or anaesthesia. This is the age of blood, of bone, of guesses. You awaken in a narrow bed, the mattress stuffed with straw and horsehair, the pillow sagging under your neck. The morning light fights through a sooty window pane and casts a pale, watery glow across the wooden floorboards. The air smells faintly of vinegar and old bread. Rats, or something like them, have been active in the walls through the night. Your apprenticeship begins today. The letter you carry is folded in your coat pocket, sealed in wax and stained from your long journey by carriage from the countryside. It bears the name of Mr. Thaddeus Morley, surgeon and apothecary, licensed in both practice and dissection. He is known across Southwark for his swift hands and experimental confidence. You are told he is progressive. That is to say, he does not always believe in bleeding his patients. Sometimes he tries other things. After a modest breakfast of stale oatcakes and tea that tastes of rust, you find your way through the tangle of early morning London. The streets are slick from last night's rain, and chimney soot clings to every surface. You pass costermongers already shouting their wares, butcher boys scrubbing blood from the cobblestones, and a thin girl sweeping vomit from the entrance of a gin house. Everything smells slightly wrong. The air is thick, not just with damp, but with a constant undertone of decay. Rotting food in gutters, waste in the open sewers. Human illness hangs here like fog. You follow the directions to Apothecary Lane, a narrow corridor between two leaning buildings, no wider than your outstretched arms. You duck beneath a low-hanging archway and emerge before a squat stone structure, its wooden sign swinging lazily overhead. It reads, T. Morley, surgeon, bones, set, teeth pulled, bleeds and remedies administered. Inside, the room is dim. Shelves line the walls, cluttered with glass bottles filled with floating things, some leafy, some organic. A fireplace crackles weakly in the corner. On the wall, rusted tools hang beside grim-looking saws, blades, and metal rods. A thin coat of dried blood outlines the grooves of the wooden work table. Mr. Morley is there. He's older than you imagined. Thin, like someone stretched too far by time, with eyes that never blink quite fast enough. He does not smile when he greets you, only gestures to a basin and says, "Wash your hands, boy. The day's work will not wait for vanity." You do as you're told. The water is cold and tinged with something coppery. There is no soap. That will be the first lesson. Soap is not part of this world yet. Mr. Morley begins the morning with a demonstration. A boy, no older than 8, is brought in by his mother. His leg is broken, she says, run over by a cart 2 days prior. He screams when the boot is removed. The limb is purple, bent oddly at the shin. Morley examines it for only a moment before instructing her to hold him tight. You're asked to assist. You feel the warmth of the boy's skin through the fabric as you hold his leg. He screams, not words, just long, ragged sounds of panic, as Mr. Morley pulls, straightens and splints. No chloroform, no laudanum. The mother turns pale and the boy bites her arm in agony. When it's done, Mr. Morley wipes his hands on a linen cloth already stiff with dried blood and hangs it back on the hook. You don't speak. You don't ask questions. You just stand there, your stomach uneasy, the memory of that scream etched into the air like smoke after fire. Later, when Morley leaves for the tavern, you're left to clean the tools. You scrub them under cold water. The residue doesn't entirely come off. You notice that most of the scalpels have tiny rust spots near the handles. You assume this is normal. No one has mentioned anything about germs. In fact, the word bacteria hasn't been spoken once. Because nobody knows yet. There is no germ theory in 1823. No antiseptics. No sterilisation. A clean-looking instrument is considered clean. And so, as night falls and you return to your lodgings, your hands still faintly stained and the scent of blood somewhere in your hair, you begin to wonder what exactly you have gotten yourself into. This is not the medicine you imagined. This is not healing in white coats with delicate charts and clean syringes. This is the 1800s, and you are becoming a doctor. But at what cost? The rain begins in the early hours, steady, dull, and persistent. By morning the streets are slick with muddy water, and a low mist hangs between the chimneys. Inside the surgery you busy yourself with preparations. The fire hasn't yet warmed the room, and a draught sneaks in under the door, chilling your hands as you lay out the instruments. The tools, still damp from yesterday's rinse, are arranged with care. Bone saw, knives, forceps, clamps. The cloth apron you've been issued carries the visible marks of its many prior uses. It's heavy with stiffness, and the scent of iron never quite fades. Mr. Morley arrives as the bells of St. George's toll in the distance. He doesn't remove his overcoat, only shakes the rain from his sleeves and instructs you to bring the stool to the centre of the room. He mutters something about a farm accident. A crushed limb, he says, before opening the logbook and glancing at a scribbled note. The patient is already outside, brought in by his brother in a cart padded with old blankets. A man of maybe 40, broad-shouldered but pale and drawn from pain. His leg is bandaged in rough linen stained through, the shape beneath clearly unnatural. The break had happened several days ago, and it has worsened since. He's quiet, breathing heavily, his eyes unfocused as he's helped into the room. Mr. Morley examines the injury with practised efficiency. He doesn't linger, doesn't consult, doesn't invite a second opinion. There is no X-ray, no antiseptic prep, no options. It will need to come off, he says with finality. The words are not cruel, only routine. The patient nods slowly. He's already resigned to the outcome. You assist in setting up. Cloth is wrapped high around the thigh, a makeshift tourniquet to restrict blood flow. Mr. Morley checks its tightness, then asks you to hold the man steady by the shoulders. The patient is given a piece of thick leather to grip between his teeth. There's no mention of anaesthesia. It's not available here. Not yet. You've read of experiments with ether, but they're far from common practice, and Morley remains sceptical of their use. For now, it's speed and restraint that count most. The procedure begins. Morley makes a circular incision around the thigh, separating the outer layers with confident, brisk movements. You watch his hands, how precisely they move, how little hesitation there is. The man groans, his body tensing beneath your hands. You can feel each muscle shift as he braces himself, his breath catching. The deeper tissues are cleared, and then comes the saw. It's a long, narrow-toothed blade with a darkened handle, worn smooth from years of use. Morley sets it to the exposed bone, and with steady strokes begins to cut. The sound is mechanical, repetitive. You keep your eyes focused on the patient's face. He's pale, lips drawn tight, eyes closed. He breathes in sharp bursts. The room smells of damp wood, lamp oil, and something metallic. When the procedure ends, Morley binds the stump with clean cloth and a mixture of lint and astringents. There are no stitches. The wound will be monitored, packed again if needed. If the patient's constitution holds, recovery is possible. If not, well, such outcomes are not uncommon. The severed limb is set aside for disposal, covered with linen and removed from sight. Morley does not reflect on it aloud. His attention turns to the remaining tasks: cleaning, record-keeping, preparing the bench for the next case. You wash the tools again. The water is cold and shallow, and you begin to understand that cleaning here is about appearance more than thoroughness. There is no knowledge yet of microbes, no chemical sterilisation. It's repetition and routine that dictate hygiene, not science. Later, as the light fades, Mr. Morley invites you to the back room where he keeps specimens. He calls it the archive, though it's little more than shelves lined with jars. Some contain anatomical preparations preserved in cloudy solutions. He speaks of past operations, of what was tried, of what failed, and occasionally what succeeded. You listen carefully, trying to learn not only from his words but from his tone. How calm he remains, how neutral. That night the rain continues, heavier now. You sit by your window, looking out over the flickering street lamps, your thoughts circling around what you saw. You're beginning to grasp that this profession, in this time, is not about certainty. It's about practical knowledge gained slowly, often painfully, sometimes at great cost. There are no clean answers. The work is physical, immediate, and rarely forgiving. Tomorrow will bring more patience, more judgment calls, more moments where instinct replaces science, and you will be expected to keep pace. You're no longer merely observing, you're becoming part of it. By the third week of your apprenticeship, the sounds of the surgery have become familiar. The creak of leather straps, the scratch of quill on parchment, the soft metallic clink of forceps on iron tray. These no longer startle you. They remain unpleasant, but your body has begun to adapt. Each morning you rise before the sun, wash your face in icy water, and button your coat while the city begins to stir. The streets smell of coal and horses, the sky thick with fog, the lamps flickering faint orange through the gloom. You move through it all now with quiet routine. The surgery has grown busier, word has spread, partly due to Mr. Morley's reputation for quick results, partly because the poorer residents of Suffolk know he charges less than the larger infirmaries. They come early, before the door opens, wrapped in coats and shawls, some hobbling, some helped by family, others leaning silently against the wall. There is no formal waiting room, just a narrow vestibule and a bench outside beneath the crooked awning. The cases vary: burns from cook fires, infected bites, a child with a swollen cheek, a dock worker whose hand was crushed beneath a barrel. You have begun taking names and writing brief notes. Mr. Morley taught you how to observe the skin for clues, pallor, blotches, thinness. You've learned how to lift a bandage slowly, how to speak plainly without promising anything. Most patients don't expect miracles, they expect speed, maybe relief. You understand now that people come not because they trust medicine, but because they are desperate, and in this city desperation moves quickly. One morning, a boy is brought in with a wound to the abdomen. The details are unclear, something involving a broken crate and a fall at the docks. The gash is long and shallow, and at first glance doesn't seem fatal, but by evening he is feverish, his eyes unfocused, the skin around the injury flushed and hot. Mr. Morley opens the wound again, pressing gently with his fingers, and shakes his head. He speaks little, just instructs you to bring cool cloth and keep him resting near the fire. You sit beside the boy as he slips between sleep and restlessness, murmuring names, places, things that don't quite make sense. By morning he's quiet. When you check his pulse, it is no longer there. Mr. Morley enters, glances once, and closes the boy's eyes with a practised hand. Sepsis, he says, and moves on to the next patient. There is no ceremony. The family collects the body before noon. That evening you clean the tools again, the saws, the knives, the bowl. Mr. Morley asks you to scrub the floor. He does not ask how you're feeling. This is not the place for that. The nature of the work does not allow much space for reflection. You begin to see why. There is always someone else in need, always another case, another decision. You're not expected to dwell. You're expected to continue. A few nights later you join Mr. Morley on a house call, a rare invitation. The streets are thick with smoke and lamplight, and you follow him on foot through narrow lanes and courtyards. The patient is an elderly woman with severe swelling in her legs. She lives in a single-room lodging above a tannery, the air sour with chemicals. Her daughter meets you at the stairs, explains the pain began weeks ago and has worsened. The legs are purple near the ankles, the skin stretched tight and warm. Mr. Morley does not bring tools, only his hands and a flask of diluted laudanum. He instructs you to observe. He speaks to the woman gently, checks her pulse, then sits back in silence. There is nothing to be done, he explains on the way home. No cure, no intervention. The best outcome is comfort. You ask what it was. He says perhaps edema, perhaps cardiac in origin. It no longer matters. In this line of work, diagnosis without treatment is a luxury. You provide what you can, sometimes relief, sometimes not even that. The next morning, as you sweep the stone floor and restock the shelves, you find yourself thinking about how little is truly understood. Most treatments feel like measured guesses. Bleeding is still commonly practiced. Mercury is given to patients with fevers. Cupping and blistering remain in use. Surgery is rapid and brutal by necessity, infection, and ever-present risk. Mr. Morley refers often to the balance of humours, though privately he seems to place more faith in experience than in theory. He tries what has worked before, he avoids what has failed. This, you're beginning to understand, is the heart of medicine in your time. One patient, a young woman with persistent coughing, returns again and again. Mr. Morley listens to her chest with the ear pressed directly to her ribs. He suspects consumption, but does not say so aloud. She's too thin, her cheeks flushed unnaturally, her voice hoarse. You see her hands tremble when she lifts the teacup. He gives her tinctures and advises rest. She nods politely, but you both know rest is impossible in her life. She works in a laundry. She must rise before the sun. You begin to feel the limitations of your role, not only as an apprentice, but as someone watching lives move beyond the reach of your tools. The surgery does what it can, but it is not always enough. Still, the days continue. You light the lamps, prepare the bench, open the shutters. You greet the first patient of the morning with a quiet nod. And when Mr. Morley arrives, shrugging off his coat and wiping his spectacles, you hand him the list you've written in the dim light. Names, injuries, notes in the margins, and begin again. By now your hands bear the marks of habit, small nicks from careless moments, the coarse polish of lye soap on your knuckles, the slight burn of tinctures soaked too long into the skin. Your nails have darkened at the edges, not from dirt but from the slow accumulation of work, ash from the fire, ink from the ledger, and the persistent faint residue of blood no matter how often you scrub. You no longer recoil from the scent of the surgery, though you recognise it instantly. A layered odour of lamp oil, boiled linen, iron, and something deeper that lingers in the floorboards and walls. It is not unpleasant, not exactly, only constant. It is nearing winter now, and the air in the room hangs low and unmoving. The shutters stay closed to preserve warmth, and the fire is kept burning through the day. Patients come in with heavier coats, their ailments often worsened by the cold. Chest tightness, stiffness of the joints, chilblains. Mr. Morley has begun using the phrase hospital rot more frequently. He describes it with vague disdain, ulcers that don't heal, wounds that darken around the edges, whole limbs lost to what he calls the miasma of infirmaries. He believes in clean air, or as much of it as the city can offer. He opens the back windows every few hours, regardless of the temperature. He does not explain why. You've learned not to ask for reasons unless you want to be corrected. He prefers to teach by instruction, not by conversation. One morning, a note arrives by courier. It is short, written in elegant, curling script, requesting Mr. Morley's presence at St. Catherine's Infirmary, where a demonstration is to be held. He tells you this with little emotion, but permits you to come along. It's a rare occasion, he says, one of the few times the broader medical community assembles to witness something together. You wonder if he's trying to impress you, but his tone suggests otherwise. He seems mildly irritated at having to travel. The infirmary is a much larger building than your corner surgery, stone-faced, grey, and lined with narrow windows. The entrance hall smells strongly of carbolic and soot. You're ushered through two wide doors into a long room arranged like a half-moon theatre. Wooden benches rise in ascending rows. At the centre, on a raised platform, is a wide table. On the table lies a figure beneath a cloth. Surrounding it are instruments laid on green-dyed linen, larger and brighter than those you use. There are surgeons already present, dressed in dark coats, their sleeves rolled high. Most wear aprons stained at the middle. A few carry notebooks, others speak quietly to one another. The audience fills slowly. This is the operating theatre, the name earned not from the formality of the space but from its shape and purpose. Observation. You are meant to watch, to learn, perhaps to marvel. There is no artificial light, only windows and a few oil lamps placed high in the rafters. The demonstration begins with little introduction. The patient, a man in middle age, is uncovered and lightly restrained. His leg is visibly swollen at the knee, misshapen and discoloured. The lead surgeon begins to speak, not to the man, but to the room. He describes the case, the decision to remove the limb, the method. He notes that anaesthesia will not be used. There is discussion about its use elsewhere, ether, chloroform, laughing gas, but most surgeons here prefer speed. They distrust these new vapours. One man mutters that unconscious patients cannot respond to complications. Another adds that delays are dangerous. You begin to understand that pain is not viewed as avoidable. It is expected, endured, and dismissed. The surgeon begins. The procedure unfolds quickly, almost too quickly for you to follow every movement. A circular incision, followed by separation of the tissue, the bone exposed and severed with the large saw. The patient grits his teeth but does not cry out. He is pale, but conscious. Assistants work to control bleeding, packing the wound with gauze. The stump is wrapped. The room fills with the muffled sounds of breathing, boots on wood, the creak of shifting bodies in the gallery above. No one applauds. There is no acknowledgement of the man's pain or endurance, only notes, nods, and a return to quiet. After the demonstration, you follow Mr. Morley down a corridor lined with tiled walls. He says little, only remarks that the theatre smells less than it once did. They scrub now, he says. Some of them. Not all, but more than they used to. You ask whether it makes a difference. He shrugs. Perhaps. You return to the surgery before evening. The streets are crowded with carts and costermongers. You pass a man coughing violently into a handkerchief stained red at the edges. He leans against the side of a building, ignored by the passers-by. You think of the young woman with the laundry job. You wonder if she has returned. That night you sort instruments by shape and edge, arranging the saws and scalpels into their narrow slots. You notice the imperfections now. Small notches in the blades, the wood worn smooth at the grip. These tools have a history, not of design or innovation, but of use. They've passed through countless hands, each one refining their hold, their angle, their pressure. You consider how little else has changed. The theory, the names, the lectures, they evolve slowly. But the act of cutting, binding, weighting, that remains the same. You place the final scalpel in its drawer and close it gently. The sound soft as cloth. Tomorrow the patients will return. The first frost settles over London in a brittle hush, layering the rooftops and gutters with a fine film of ice. Smoke lingers low in the alleys, curling around the chimneys and hanging above the streets like a veil. Inside the surgery, the fire burns constantly now, but it never quite warms the corners of the room. The walls sweat, and the windows fog with each exhale. You wake earlier than usual, not from alarm but from the cold. The straw in your mattress crackles as you shift, and your boots resist when you pull them on, leather hardened from the damp. There is a rhythm now. Not a comfortable one, but steady. Mr. Morley trusts you with small duties, boiling bandages, mixing tinctures, recording patient names in the log. You can now wrap a wound quickly and efficiently, clean a minor cut without instruction, drain a blister without hesitation. He rarely offers praise, but he no longer corrects your every movement. That, you suspect, is its own kind of approval. Late in the week, a delivery arrives from the anatomy school near Fleet Street. You're not told what it contains, only that it's for your instruction. A narrow wooden crate, reinforced with rope and thick nails, is brought into the back room and left on the stone table. Morley unwraps it without comment. Inside, wrapped in cloth and straw, is a cadaver, partially dissected, preserved just enough to be of use. The smell is immediate and heavy, a mix of chemicals and something deeper, earthier, impossible to describe without remembering it forever. The face is covered. Morley leaves it that way. You're not here to learn who this person was. You're here to learn what they can still teach. He hands you a worn copy of Gray's Anatomy and opens it to the chapter on the forearm. You spend the morning tracing tendons, isolating nerves, peeling away layers of tissue under his supervision. The work is methodical, clean, more patient than the surgeries you've witnessed. It feels different, still grim, still clinical, but slower. Morley corrects your grip on the scalpel once, then lets you proceed. He speaks quietly about muscle groups, the behaviour of joints, the strange geometry of the human body. You listen carefully, though your stomach turns more than once. The lantern burns low beside you, casting flickers across the walls. Time blurs. This is the only kind of patient you're allowed to make mistakes on. In the afternoon, Morley leaves to visit a colleague, and you are left alone in the surgery for the first time. You wash your hands slowly, twice, before re-entering the room. The cadaver remains where you left it, the limbs still slightly bent, the cloth now damp at the edges. You stare at it for a long time before continuing your study. You know the risks of being caught with a body not properly registered, but this one has papers. It came through legal channels, or close enough. There is no fear, only the peculiar quiet of the room, the closeness of it. the soft rustling of pages and cloth and your own breath. You close the book and place the scalpel down with care. In the days that follow, you begin to notice small changes in your own manner. You no longer flinch when unwrapping a dressing. You recognise the odour of infection before seeing it. You can now predict when a wound is worsening simply by how the patient walks. These details accumulate not through lectures or theory, but through repetition. Each visit, each case adds another thread. You learn by presence, by proximity to pain, by seeing what happens when a limb is left too long, or when a fever is not addressed quickly enough, or when a cut that looked benign reveals something deeper days later. One patient, a middle-aged cooper, returns with a hand injury sustained at work. You saw him once before, applied poultice, instructed him to keep the wound wrapped and clean. He did not. The cut has festered. The edges are red, the skin warm and shiny. Mr. Morley studies it quietly, then turns to you and gestures with his chin. What would you do? You hesitate, then suggest draining it, perhaps a hot compress. He nods once and leaves the room. You prepare the tools. The cooper sits in silence, watching you with mild unease. You do the work as carefully as you can, your fingers steady despite the sting of sweat behind your neck. When you're done, you wrap the hand again, tighter than before, and tell him to return in 2 days. He nods, flexes the fingers slightly, and leaves without a word. You clean the basin, wash the tools, and return to the logbook. In the margins, you write small details about the cooper, how he spoke, how he carried himself, the look in his eye when you began the procedure. Morley sees your notes later and says nothing, but he does not erase them. That evening, you sit by the hearth with the old anatomy book open on your lap. The illustrations seem less abstract now. You know these lines are not imagined. You've felt them beneath your fingers. The tendons that stretch like cords, the bones that curve just so, the veins that pulse faintly when the body is well. It no longer feels like guesswork. Not entirely, but it does not feel like mastery either. There is too much still unknown. Outside, the frost returns. Inside, you turn another page. The room behind the surgery, the one rarely entered, is colder than the others, and lit by a single, dust-covered window that faces the alley. You've only seen it in glimpses, the door ajar when Mr. Morley passed through quickly to fetch a bottle or a stack of papers. Today, he tells you to follow him inside. You hesitate for a moment at the threshold, not from fear, but from a kind of reverence. This space, though not grand, feels different, quieter, more deliberate. It is a study of sorts. Books line the walls in uneven rows, spines faded and corners frayed. Some are handwritten, others printed in Latin or French. A small writing desk stands near the fireplace, its surface cluttered with open volumes, half-filled notebooks, dried ink pots, and loose sheets covered in annotations. The room smells of paper and dust, wax and faint mould. A thick ledger lies open, its pages filled with patient names going back decades. You run your finger along the margin and find dates from before your birth. Morley gestures for you to sit. He says nothing for a long while, just stares at the fire, occasionally sipping from a cup of black tea gone cold. Then he begins to speak, not as a teacher, but as a man recalling fragments. He talks about his early years at the hospital in St. Thomas's before he came to Suffolk, about how he had believed at first in systems and rules. He'd copied treatments from the pages of Galen, Sydenham, Boerhaave. He had bled his patients dutifully, purged them with salts and smoke, applied leeches with care, and most of them had died anyway. So he had started to keep records, obsessive ones, not just outcomes, but observations, what they ate, what they feared, the colour of their skin on the 4th day of fever, which poultices made the swelling worse, which seemed to do nothing at all. He pulls down a notebook from the shelf and hands it to you. The cover is cracked leather, soft at the edges. Inside are hundreds of entries, some brief, others pages long. Most of the names you don't recognise, but the injuries, the diseases, the symptoms, they are familiar now. You have seen many of them with your own eyes. He says he no longer believes in certainty, only in noticing patterns. We work by memory, he says, and by mistake. Then he asks you what you've noticed, not what you've learned from books, but from watching, from standing close to the work. You speak slowly, unsure if he's truly asking or testing you. You mention how the fevered often become quiet before the end, how wounds that smell sweet are often worse than those that smell foul, how children seem to bear pain longer than men, how some recover from injuries you thought would be fatal, and others perish from scratches that seem trivial. He listens carefully, then says nothing more. The next morning he assigns you to begin your own ledger. A slim, unmarked journal is placed on the shelf above your sleeping cot. You're to record everything: name, condition, treatment, outcome. He tells you not to worry about handwriting, only clarity. If you see something, he says, write it. That day, a woman is brought in by her neighbour, collapsed in the street while selling herbs near the bridge. She's older, with weathered skin and breath that comes in short, ragged bursts. Mr. Morley suspects a congestion of the lungs. He applies mustard plasters to her back and gives her a draught of warmed cordial laced with syrup of squill. You sit beside her for an hour, noting the sound of her breathing, how her hands tremble, the rhythm of her pulse. She does not speak much, only watches the fire. By evening, she sleeps. You write the first entry in your new book. At first, the process feels awkward. You find yourself second-guessing what to include. Should you write that she spoke only once to ask if the fire was real? Should you mention the way her breathing improved when the room grew warmer? You decide to include both. Later, Morley reads your entry and offers no correction. Over the next days, your ledger begins to fill. Each patient leaves behind a pattern, sometimes obvious, sometimes subtle. The boy with swollen joints whose father carried him 3 miles, the sailor with a deep cough that never quite leaves, the child burned by an overturned kettle. Some return, some vanish. Some you suspect do not live long enough to return. Their stories remain unfinished in your notes. There are no endings, only records. One evening you return to the doctor's library on your own. You scan the shelves, running your hand along the worn titles: Materia Medica, The Art of Chirurgery, On the Nature of Wounds. You open a volume at random and read an account of a man treated for melancholia with trepanation, drilling a hole in the skull to release ill vapours. The handwriting is precise, the tone utterly calm. You close the book and stare at the fire, wondering whether the treatment had worked, or if it had simply ended the suffering by more permanent means. The longer you spend in this room, the more you understand that medicine in this time is not about certainty. It is about watching, recording, adjusting. Every patient is both a life and a case. Every recovery is something learned, every loss something not yet understood. You close your journal and set it carefully on the shelf, next to Mr. Morley's oldest notebook. Tomorrow, more will arrive. You'll start again. The day begins before the sun, the streets still dark, the cobbles wet with condensation. You've taken to lighting the fire yourself now, before Mr. Morley arrives, stacking the wood with practiced hands and coaxing the flame into life with strips of old ledger paper. The tools are arranged in silence, cloths folded, bottles restoppered, everything in its place before the first knock sounds at the door. The morning's patient is an older gentleman in wool gloves and a velvet coat, his breath wheezing faintly with each step. His voice carries the measured tones of a man used to being listened to, but the slight tremble in his hand betrays something else. Fear, perhaps, or simply fatigue. He explains that his head aches often, and that he suffers from palpitations and a feeling of heaviness. He believes his blood is too thick, or that it has risen upward and caused imbalance. He uses the language of books, but not of anatomy. Morley listens with polite indifference, asks 2 questions, then sets about preparing the basin. Bloodletting is one of the few treatments still practiced as much out of expectation as belief. Patients often arrive already asking for it, as if the ritual itself provides reassurance. In some cases Morley agrees, in others he diverts them toward rest, or tinctures. But this man insists. His physician, who lives across the river, has bled him before, and he claims it helped. You prepare the equipment, the brass bowl, the clean cloth, the fleam with its fine triangular blade. Morley chooses the median vein of the arm, locating it by touch, rubbing gently until it rises just beneath the skin. He binds the man's upper arm with a narrow strip of linen, then pricks the vessel cleanly. Blood runs warm and slow, a deep garnet red, pooling into the bowl with soft rhythm. The man relaxes visibly, his eyes half closed. You notice the line of sweat on his brow ease, the corners of his mouth soften. He believes in the treatment, that, in this moment, matters more than anything written in your books. Morley removes a measured amount, less than a teacup, and binds the arm. The man thanks him solemnly, pays in coin, and leaves. As you clean the basin, you glance at the blood and wonder how something so ordinary, so expected, still holds power over minds and bodies alike. That afternoon, a woman arrives from the rag market, her arm bandaged hastily with fabric and pins. She slipped while lifting a crate and struck a broken bottle. The wound is long but not deep. Morley steps aside and lets you examine it. The cloth comes away slowly, revealing the skin beneath. Red, irritated but not infected. You clean it gently with diluted spirits and thread a neat line of sutures beneath his watchful eye. When the woman thanks you, it's with a brief touch to your sleeve and a nod. Her eyes do not meet yours for long. She's already late for work. As evening falls, you and Morley return to the subject of blood. He does not trust the humoral theory, though he was trained in it. He speaks of it now with something close to weariness. "I have bled men who worsened, and refused others who recovered," he says. Balance of humours. It sounds tidy, but we're not tidy creatures. He describes the old belief that the body is governed by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and how illness is caused by their imbalance. He no longer believes this, but many do. It comforts them. He does not challenge their views unless necessary. You begin to understand that part of the job is not only treating the body, but managing what the patient expects to be true. Later, you record the day's work in your journal. You write slowly, carefully, noting the symptoms, the treatments, the small shifts in demeanour. You include the gentleman's insistence, the woman's silence. You add a line that you're unsure belongs in a medical record. The patient was reassured by the sound of the blood in the basin. You're not certain why it matters, only that it felt real. The surgery quiets again. Outside, a coal cart rumbles past. Inside, the fire burns low, casting orange light across the walls. You study the shelf of jars and bottles, the blue tincture, the powdered bark, the tiny envelope of dried foxglove leaves. You know now which ones soothe, which ones irritate, and which ones can kill if mismeasured. The more you learn, the more you see how little is certain. But the tools are still here, the notes are still here, the body still responds, and so the work continues. There is a room behind the surgery that Mr. Morley rarely opens. Not locked exactly, just unused, its door left shut, the dust collecting along its frame in fine grey lines. One morning, as the city stirs beneath a ceiling of low, pewter-coloured clouds, he gestures toward it with a brief nod. "We'll need that room today," he says. "There's no space elsewhere." He says it as if explaining nothing at all. You open the door carefully. The room is narrow and dim, the single window half covered by a rotted curtain that crumbles at your touch. The air smells dry, untouched, stale with the scent of stored things. There is no furniture, only the worn outlines where a cot once stood, and a darkened ring on the floor where oil or something worse has soaked through the wood. You sweep the room, then scrub the floor with vinegar and water until the scent sharpens and stings your nose. Mr. Morley brings in a mattress rolled tightly in linen, and together you lay it down beside the wall. The patient arrives an hour later. She's a girl, perhaps 16, carried between her mother and an older brother. Her head rests against her shoulder limply, eyes half open but unfocused. Her hair is matted with sweat, and her clothes, though recently changed, are damp with heat. The family speaks in low voices, using the word fever again and again. They cannot afford the infirmary. They heard of Morley from a man in the tannery who once had his foot stitched here. They are not asking for a miracle, only space, time, maybe comfort. Morley speaks gently to them, then checks her pulse and looks into her mouth. Her tongue is pale and dry. Her breath comes fast but shallow. He listens at her chest and says nothing. You help settle her onto the mattress. She barely stirs. Her eyes flicker open once, staring at the window, then close again. Her mother thanks you both, her voice tight and trembling. They are told to return tomorrow. She may not wake before then. You prepare cool cloths and place a chipped basin beside the bed. Morley brings in a folded blanket and a narrow bottle of barley water. He assigns you to monitor her through the day. Watch the breathing, he says, and the fingers. If they begin to curl or twitch, come get me. The hours pass slowly. You sit on a stool near the bed, listening to the rhythm of her breath and the quiet creaks of the house. Occasionally you rise to check her temperature by touch. Forehead, chest, wrists, your hands trying to read what no instrument can measure. There is a dullness to her presence. She does not speak, but she's not quite unconscious either. Her limbs shift slightly, and once she murmurs something you cannot understand. You bring the cloth back to the basin, rinse it, fold it again, and lay it across her brow. At one point she begins to tremble, lightly, as if chilled, though her body is burning. You call for Morley, and he enters swiftly, places a hand at her throat, then moves it to her side, counting softly. He administers a draught, something bitter, mixed with crushed bark, and then watches her with a gaze that has seen this too many times. "We don't know if it's typhoid," he says later, when she is stilled again, or relapsing fever, or something else entirely. He speaks as if naming them makes little difference. They burn the same, they end the same. In the evening, the light from the window fades to grey. You light a lamp and adjust the wick carefully. The girl's skin shines with sweat, her breath now quieter, slower. You begin to record her condition in your journal. The fluctuations, the murmurs, the way her hands began to curl inward just before the shivering. You include everything, even the faintest things. A noise she made, a flicker of her eyes toward the ceiling, her fingers brushing the wall beside her. Mr. Morley reads it later and nods once. "Keep going," he says. The next morning she's awake. Barely. But her eyes find you now. She doesn't speak, but her gaze follows your movement as you prepare the water, the cloths, the draught. Her breathing is quieter, her pulse still weak but steadier. Morley checks her and says, "She may come through." Then, more softly, "But not because of anything we did." You understand what he means. There was no treatment, not really. Only patience, observation, fluids and time and luck. Sometimes the body saves itself. Sometimes it does not. The girl's mother returns at midday and weeps at the sight of her still alive. You help carry her back to their lodgings in a hired cart. The mother offers a coin, which Morley refuses. When you return to the surgery, the room is empty again. You open the window and strip the mattress, fold the blanket, rinse the basin. The scent of vinegar returns as you clean the wood, sharp and clean. You close the door without locking it. You suspect it will be needed again soon. The dawn light filters weakly through the grimy window panes of the surgery, casting muted shadows across the wooden floorboards, warped by time and countless footsteps. The chill of the early morning seeps in through cracks in the walls and the uneven frame of the door, settling deep into the bones of the room. You move carefully, mindful of the scattered tools arrayed on the narrow metal table. A collection that seems as old as the building itself, tarnished by age and use but nonetheless meticulously arranged. These are the instruments of your trade, the implements by which you are expected to coax life from illness and injury, even when the odds are against you. There are knives, sharp, gleaming faintly in the weak light, with handles worn smooth by countless hands, scalpels and fleams designed for swift incisions, bone saws with their heavy teeth and curved blades, forceps, hooks, and scissors, each a piece of an ancient puzzle that you're only just beginning to understand. The instruments bear the stains of countless surgeries, darkened by rust and blood, some never fully washed clean, the remnants of one patient lingering quietly beneath the steel, waiting to meet the next. You're told to sterilize them by dipping in boiling water or wiping with a cloth soaked in spirits, but there is no fire hot enough, no method sure enough to guarantee purity. You pick up a small set of needles, the eye too tiny for your clumsy fingers at first. You steady your hand, threading the linen sutures as best you can. The linen is rough, uneven, a far cry from the fine threads you imagine might be ideal for closing wounds. When you finally bring the needle to a ragged cut on a patient's arm, the flesh resists. The skin, swollen and angry with infection, does not yield easily. You pull the thread tight, knotting it as firmly as you can, but the edges remain jagged, the wound imperfectly sealed. The patient winces, lips pressed tight, but offers no complaint. The pain is part of the process, the cost of hope. You recall the conversation you overheard at the market, where a blacksmith's wife spoke in hushed tones of the bleeding man who had lost a leg last week at the docks. He'd been carried into a different surgery, one with newer tools and a man who boasted of skill and education. Yet he had died all the same, the infection creeping like a shadow through his veins. It is a reminder of the stakes and of the limits of the instruments you wield. In this era, the tools themselves are relics, passed down, repurposed, seldom replaced. Their design is often crude, their maintenance minimal. The surgeons of the time do not yet know that unseen enemies, bacteria and germs, cling to these very blades, entering wounds with each cut, turning healing into hazard. The notion of sterilization beyond simple washing is unheard of, a mystery waiting decades ahead to reveal itself. You set the instruments down and wipe your hands on a rough linen cloth, your fingers sticky with drying blood and tincture. The smell clings to you, a mixture of iron and medicine and something faintly sour. It is the scent of the surgery and of the struggle between life and death that plays out here daily. Later, as you prepare for the afternoon patient, a young man arrives with a deep puncture wound in his thigh caused by a nail piercing through the sole of his boot. The injury looks small but betrays signs of infection, swelling, redness, and heat radiating from the site. You recall from Mr. Morley's lessons that wounds like this often lead to complications, sometimes fatal, if not treated promptly and carefully. But treatment options are limited and imperfect. Morley instructs you to irrigate the wound with warm water mixed with vinegar, a practice believed to cleanse it. You prepare the solution and carefully pour it over the injury, the young man flinching slightly at the sting. You then remove the largest shards of dirt and fabric lodged in the flesh with the forceps, your hands steady despite the patient's grimace. Suturing the wound is risky. The skin is inflamed, and stitching might trap infection inside. Still, you close it as best you can, applying a poultice made from crushed herbs and flaxseed. Throughout the procedure, you reflect on how much of this is still guesswork. Trial and error, repeated over and over, with each patient a lesson written in flesh. The knowledge is empirical but incomplete, like assembling a map from fragments, with vast unknowns between the pieces. Your journals have become a lifeline, a way to remember what worked and what did not, but there are no guarantees. After the patient leaves, you turn your attention back to the instruments. You soak them in hot water and spirits again, scrubbing with a brush made from stiff animal hair. Still, you cannot know what microscopic dangers remain, unseen and silent. You wonder what it will take for medicine to cross the threshold, to see the enemy clearly and fight it with purpose rather than blind hope. The surgery quiets, the light waning as afternoon slips toward evening. You sit by the window and watch the city's smoke curl upward, mixing with the fading sky. In the distance the bells toll, marking another hour past. Your fingers still ache slightly from the day's work. The instruments lie ready on the table, waiting for tomorrow. You close your eyes briefly and feel the weight of all you do not know pressing down alongside the weight of all you are trying to learn. The morning begins with a chill still clinging to the air as you open the surgery door and step inside. The fire in the hearth is just a few glowing embers now, and the faint scent of burnt peat lingers like a ghost. Today, your thoughts turn not to tools or wounds, but to something much smaller, something invisible to the naked eye but devastating in its effects. Germs, bacteria. You have heard whispers of their existence, strange theories that life too small to see can cause great harm, yet no one here speaks openly of it. It is a secret held by a few scholars, far away in places with polished floors and clean gowns, worlds apart from this cramped and dusty room. You look at the patient waiting in the next bed, a woman with swollen joints and red streaks running up her arms, her face pale beneath the flickering candlelight. She has been feverish for days, her body racked with chills and sweat. Morley suspects an infection that has spread beyond the wound she suffered in a fall, but he cannot say what caused it. You watch as he changes her dressing, his hands steady but gentle. There is no antiseptic to apply, only spirits and vinegar and the occasional herbal poultice. You wonder if these are enough, or if the unseen enemy is already too far inside. You remember a recent story Morley told you of a colleague who had lost his wife to what was called childbed fever, a cruel and rapid illness that struck women after childbirth. The colleague, a respected surgeon, had no explanation for it and no cure. He was haunted by her death, haunted by the helplessness that filled the rooms where she suffered. It was said that he began washing his hands obsessively after, though no one understood why. That act, small and overlooked, would one day become a cornerstone of medical practice. But here, it is met with confusion and even resistance. The thought unsettles you as you assist Morley with the patient's bandages. You wipe your hands on the same cloth used to clean the last wound, the one you hoped was clean enough. You realise how easy it must be for invisible things to travel, on hands, on tools, on cloths. how your efforts to heal may inadvertently harm. Later, Morley speaks quietly of the theories circulating among certain medical circles, of Dr. Semmelweis in Vienna, who insists that washing hands can save lives, and of Pasteur, whose experiments suggest that microorganisms cause decay and disease. Morley admires their courage but remains cautious. Change here comes slowly, and without certainty the old ways persist. Many in the hospital still believe in humours and miasmas, bad air that poisons the body. You wonder how long it will take before this invisible enemy is seen and fought with knowledge rather than fear. As dusk falls, you take your journal and write. You describe the patient's condition, the treatments applied, the slow decline despite efforts. You note your growing doubts, your hopes for new discoveries. Outside, the city hums with life. Horses clattering on cobblestones, distant laughter, the low murmur of voices carried on the wind. Inside, the fire crackles softly, and the weight of the unseen enemy presses quietly in the corners. You fold your journal closed and rest your pen, knowing tomorrow will bring more patients, more questions, and the slow, arduous work of discovery. The morning sun filters weakly through the grimy glass of the surgery window as you prepare for the day ahead. Outside, the city stirs with muted sounds. The distant clatter of horse-drawn carts, the murmur of voices exchanging hurried news in the narrow streets. Inside, the air is thick with the familiar scent of linseed oil and drying herbs, mingled with the sharper tang of spirits used for cleaning wounds. It is a scent you have come to associate not just with medicine, but with uncertainty. Today, a young boy is brought to the surgery clutching his side with a grimace that does not fade. The injury is from a fall, and the ribs beneath the skin are bruised and possibly fractured. There is no X-ray, no clear way to see the damage beneath the flesh, only touch, observation, and guesswork. Morley examines the boy carefully, his fingers pressing lightly against the swelling, listening for breath sounds, trying to decipher what cannot be seen. You watch as Morley prescribes rest and a poultice of willow bark, an early pain reliever known to ease suffering, though its chemical secrets remain unappreciated. The boy's mother nods gratefully, though worry lines her face. The treatment is gentle but limited. The ribs must heal on their own, with little more than care to guide the way. You're reminded how much of medicine in this era is an art, a series of educated guesses framed by hard-won experience and trial. Later, an elderly woman arrives with a persistent cough and a weakness that seems to seep from her very bones. Morley listens to her chest with a brass stethoscope, a device still considered novel by many, and nods grimly. Tuberculosis, he suspects, though he cannot confirm it without the modern tools yet to come. The woman is given a regimen of rest, fresh air and nourishment, but you both know how few recover from the disease. You recall reading that many treatments are based on trial and error, a slow process of observation, documentation, and adaptation. Remedies that help some may harm others, practices once hailed as breakthroughs later discarded when proven ineffective or dangerous. It is a humbling truth, and one that weighs heavily on you as you watch patients leave, some hopeful, others resigned. As the day wears on, you clean instruments and prepare dressings, your hands steady but your mind restless. You think of the countless unknowns, the illnesses you cannot yet name, the treatments still undiscovered. You wonder how many lives will be lost before medicine finds firmer ground. Yet amidst the uncertainty, there is a quiet resilience, the dedication of practitioners like Morley, the trust of patients who place their fragile lives in your hands, the slow accumulation of knowledge from each success and failure. It is a journey without end, one marked by patience and perseverance as much as by skill. As twilight descends, you close your journal, the page filled with notes on symptoms, treatments, and outcomes. The night deepens outside, but inside, the surgery remains a beacon of hope amid the shadows of ignorance. It arrives mid-morning, hauled in by two labourers, dust-covered and awkward to carry, its shape hidden beneath a stained canvas sheet. Mr. Morley signs a slip of paper, thanks the men without ceremony, and instructs you to help move it into the corner of the main room. As you peel back the cover, the sight beneath gives you pause. It is a bloodletting chair. Dark wood, deep seat, high armrests, a head support that can be adjusted with a rusted iron crank. Leather straps dangle loosely at the sides, cracked and stiff from years of disuse, or perhaps far too much use. The chair is heavy with age, worn smooth at the points where patients once gripped the arms in pain or apprehension. The smell of old leather and iron lingers faintly, mingling with the dry scent of herbs and dust that always fills this place. Morley says nothing at first. He inspects the frame with practiced eyes, tests the tension on the straps, checks the joints and feet. Then he turns away and begins preparing the tray. A basin, a cloth, a series of knives, some curved like talons, others flat and wide like tongues of metal, and several glass cups of varying sizes, the rims charred slightly from earlier uses. You've seen drawings of this in books: cupping, scarification, the deliberate drawing of blood to restore the balance of humours. It is an old practice, still common in certain towns and households, even as it slowly loses favour among the more modern-minded. But here, in this surgery, it is still used. Morley believes in observation, not theory. If something appears to work, it is allowed to remain. The first patient arrives not long after. A man of middle years with flushed cheeks and a stiffness in his neck. He speaks with effort, his eyes darting between you and the chair, as he explains that he's been overcome by dizziness, heaviness in the limbs, a kind of pressure behind the eyes. Morley nods, his expression unreadable. Blood stagnation, he murmurs. Too much heat in the body. A decision is made without hesitation. You help him into the chair. He sits stiffly, gripping the arms as you strap his forearm to the wooden support. You can feel his pulse as you adjust the strap, strong but rapid. Morley selects a short lancet and sterilises it in alcohol, at least what sterilisation means here, before making a shallow incision near the elbow crease. The skin parts with ease, and the blood flows swiftly into the waiting basin, dark and steaming slightly in the cool air. The patient does not cry out. He watches the blood leave him with a kind of grim patience, as though expecting relief to flow in the opposite direction. Morley times it carefully. Too much blood taken, and the patient could faint or worse. Too little, and the treatment is deemed ineffective. After perhaps 6 or 7 ounces, the flow slows. A tight bandage is applied. The man slumps slightly, eyes closed. He's offered barley water and a quiet place to sit. Whether he feels better later is hard to say. Some do, others don't. You clean the basin, then wipe the floor where a few drops escaped. You notice how easily this process could go wrong. The knife slipping too deep, the blood flowing too fast, the patient's heart giving out. There is no regulation, no precise measurement, only judgment, experience, and hope. Even Morley admits as much when he speaks later that afternoon. We do what we can with what we know, he says, not quite defending the practice, not quite condemning it. You learn how to use the chair, how to tilt the headrest for patients brought in with nosebleeds, how to bind the arms with care but firmness, how to empty the basins discreetly, away from the view of the next in line. The blood is always warm, always slightly metallic in smell, always too familiar. You stop flinching after a few days. You stop wondering whether it helps. You begin to understand why these practices endure, because they provide the illusion of control, because patients feel as though something has been done, even if the cure is uncertain, and because doctors, in the face of mystery and suffering, must do something. As evening falls and you extinguish the last of the lamps, you glance once more at the chair. It sits in its corner like a relic from another age, but it is not yet an artifact. It is still in use, still part of the medicine of your time, and tomorrow it may be used again. The shelves along the back wall of the surgery are tall and slightly uneven, warped by time and humidity. They hold dozens of small glass jars, cork-stoppered bottles, cracked ceramic pots, and neatly labelled boxes wrapped in linen string. You've spent weeks cataloguing them, writing down each name, ingredient, and supposed purpose in your growing notebook. This is the apothecary shelf, and it is as mysterious as it is essential. Some of the contents are familiar. Laudanum, a heavy liquid the colour of amber, tinctured opium dissolved in alcohol. It's used for everything. Coughs, sleeplessness, diarrhoea, even grief. Its effectiveness is without question, though the cost is steep and not just in coin. Patients sometimes become dull, slow-eyed, and distant after too many doses. Some begin to crave it long after their symptoms are gone, returning to you with pale faces and trembling hands, asking politely, then urgently, for just a few more drops. Morley gives it sparingly now, though once, he admits, it flowed freely. Beside the laudanum sits a jar of calomel, a white powder made from mercury chloride. You use it to purge the bowels, to draw out supposed toxins, to balance the humours. Patients given calomel often spend hours in cramping agony, and the purging sometimes brings more harm than healing. But it is expected, part of the ritual of recovery. If the sickness leaves the body violently, it is assumed something good must be happening. There are herbs too, dried foxglove for weak hearts, though its strength is difficult to measure and often dangerously unpredictable. Belladonna for muscle spasms and eye dilation, though too much can still the heart entirely. Chamomile, elderflower, horehound, all dried and bundled, their use is passed down more through tradition than certainty. Morley explains that much of what you dispense is based on observation, not proof. He recounts how surgeons once bled patients until they collapsed, or applied hot irons to the skin to draw out fevers. Many of these methods have faded, but not all. What remains is a patchwork of ancient remedies and emerging theory, stitched together by experience and necessity. In one corner of the shelf you find bottles imported from distant cities, coloured elixirs with grand promises etched into their labels, cures for all manner of female troubles, elixir of life, restorative for the nerves, most a little more than alcohol, herbs and sugar, some contain cocaine, some arsenic. You've seen them used in the wealthier homes, handed out by travelling salesmen with smooth voices and bright waistcoats. Morley disapproves, but sometimes even he orders a bottle when nothing else seems to work. You begin to understand that being a doctor here means constantly choosing between imperfect options. There is no precise science to guide you, only precedent, instinct, and patient desperation. You mix tinctures by candlelight, shaking the ingredients with steady hands, hoping that what you've chosen will help and not harm. One afternoon, a young woman arrives with her mother, pale and faint, eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. She's been suffering from nerves, they say, difficulty eating, headaches, sadness that does not lift. You prepare a tonic of valerian root and lavender, mixed with a drop of laudanum. It's a gentle combination, relatively speaking. As the woman drinks, you wonder whether it will soothe her or simply mask something deeper, something neither you nor your remedies can reach. That night, you reorganize the shelf, trying to make sense of the chaos. You place the deadlier substances high out of reach, the gentler herbs within easier grasp. You wrap new labels onto the most worn bottles, taking care to preserve their fading instructions. You clean the dust from the edges and polish the glass until it gleams faintly in the lamplight. As you step back, you realize that the shelf is more than storage. It's a map of the limits of your knowledge. Each jar a theory, each bottle a hope, each powder a gamble. You run your fingers lightly over the smooth neck of a bottle and imagine a time when medicine might be different, measurable, testable, safe. But for now, this is what you have. And tomorrow, someone will come through the door, sick and afraid, and you will reach for one of these jars and try your best to help them. It is early when Morley invites you to join him for a visit to the city's teaching hospital, a place you've heard much about but never entered. You walk together through winding streets just after the morning bells toll, the air cool and smelling faintly of coal smoke and damp stone. When the hospital comes into view, it is larger than expected, imposing in its way, with heavy brick walls and soot-darkened windows reflecting the pale sky. Inside, the hallways are wide, their tiled floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Orderlies move with quiet efficiency, and the scent of carbolic acid hangs unmistakably in the air. It is sharper and more constant here than in the smaller surgery, mingled with the dry must of linen and the occasional tinge of something metallic, always lingering, never quite fading. The hospital is divided into wards, rows of beds separated by curtains or wooden partitions. Each holds a patient. Some lie still, some sit propped against pillows reading or simply staring. The hum of human presence surrounds you. Low voices, soft coughs, the clinking of utensils on ceramic dishes. A few patients nod politely as you pass. Others seem unaware of your presence, their minds turned inward. Morley leads you through a quieter corridor toward a section of the building set aside for instruction. The teaching gallery is built like a small theatre, with tiered seating rising around a central space below. This is where students observe procedures and learn the practical side of medicine. The skylight overhead lets in a broad grey light that spills across the tiled floor. The bench is already half filled with students murmuring over notebooks and texts. Today, a demonstration is planned, a discussion of bone injury and the necessary intervention for when a limb can no longer be saved. The supervising physician arrives, greeting the students before beginning his explanation, calm and steady in tone. He walks them through the logic of the procedure, the risks of infection, the way splinters in the bone can complicate healing, and the importance of timely intervention in preserving life. The patient, already prepared and resting, is under the care of an experienced team. A cloth infused with ether rests near at hand, an approach that, though not without flaws, is increasingly used in hospitals like this. The physician's instructions are clear, the assistant staff ready. As the procedure begins, you remain seated above, watching with quiet focus. The process is orderly and efficient, guided by practiced movements. Cloths are changed as needed, and tools are passed quickly. No unnecessary talk, only concentration. The students around you are attentive, taking notes, whispering comparisons with texts they've studied. You can sense their respect, though a few struggle to mask their unease. It's not a spectacle, not here. It's a lesson, serious and methodical, grounded in the desire to understand how to relieve suffering, even when options are few. Once the procedure concludes, the patient is taken to a quiet ward to recover, and the students disperse with murmured reflections. The lead physician answers several questions with composed clarity before turning back to his notes. There is no rush here, only the steady rhythm of practice. Afterward, Morley walks with you to the hospital library. It's a quiet, narrow room lined with casebooks and worn medical volumes. He shows you records from earlier decades, entries written in careful hand, describing symptoms, treatments, and outcomes. You trace your fingers over them, realizing how many of these cases were recorded before even the most basic principles of disease prevention were widely accepted. Yet the record keeping is diligent. In each line, you sense a desire to learn, to do better, even amid uncertainty. As you leave the hospital in the early evening, the city outside seems softer somehow. Lights flicker in windows, and the river glimmers faintly in the fading light. You're left with a quiet awareness of what you've seen. Not only the procedures and the tools, but the immense weight carried by those who work in places like this, and those who come here seeking relief. It's clear now how medicine in this era is shaped not just by science, but by courage, routine, and careful, daily endurance. You say little on the walk back. There is much to think about, and tomorrow there will be more to learn. It arrives by post, folded crisply in a pale blue envelope and sealed with a careful hand. The address is written in precise slanted script, your name followed by care of Mr. Morley surgeon, with a return stamp from Edinburgh, Scotland. Morley raises an eyebrow as he hands it to you over breakfast, but says nothing, turning back to his tea and the day's medical ledger. You carry the letter to the back room and open it slowly, the paper thick beneath your fingers, the ink slightly faded along the creases. It is from an old acquaintance, a fellow apprentice who left several months ago to study at one of the more progressive medical schools in Britain. His words are careful, thoughtful, not boastful, but behind them you detect a tone of quiet urgency. He writes of lectures filled with new theories, of anatomy lessons guided by precise cadaver work, of discussions on disease that are changing the way students think about the body entirely. The letter speaks often of germs, invisible agents that might be responsible for wound infections, fevers, even entire epidemics. It's a theory gaining ground, your friend says, especially among those who've studied under men like Lister and Pasteur. Disputed by many still, of course, but the evidence is mounting. In Edinburgh, they're boiling their tools now before operations, even washing their hands in carbolic before touching a patient. It is not yet common practice, but already the results are being observed. Fewer post-surgical deaths, cleaner recoveries, shorter stays. You read and reread the letter, unsure what to make of it. The hospital, the university, even the surgery where you now work, none of these places have adopted such practices, at least not formally. There are murmurs, yes, but the older physicians scoff at the idea. Invisible causes are seen as a return to superstition by some, a distraction by others. They prefer what can be touched, measured, removed with a scalpel. But something in your friend's tone lingers with you. He describes watching an operation in which the surgical team used boiled instruments and cleaned the site with carbolic before and after. The patient, a boy with a serious leg injury, not only survived but recovered without the high fever and inflammation that so often follow. There's more here than just theory. There's a shift taking place. Later that day, you bring the letter to Morley. He reads it slowly, eyes narrowed. When he finishes, he places it on the table between you. "I've heard the talk," he says simply. "Haven't seen it proven here. Not yet." You hesitate, then ask, "Would you ever try it?" He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he leans back in his chair, arms crossed, gaze turned toward the quiet window. "Perhaps," he says at last. "If it truly saved lives, why wouldn't we? But this isn't Edinburgh, or Paris, or Vienna. We do what we can, with what we have." You nod, though something inside you has already begun to shift. That evening you clean the surgical tools with hot water, a bit of soap, even a little carbolic oil from an old jar in the corner cupboard. You do it without ceremony, without telling Morley, and he doesn't ask. But he watches, quietly. Over the next few days you continue the habit. You wash your hands more thoroughly between patients, change cloths more often, wipe surfaces with a dampened rag. Small acts, hardly revolutionary. But each one feels like a thread pulling you towards something larger, something not yet fully formed but present, just beneath the surface. You begin to study your patients more carefully in the days after procedures, watching for signs of redness, swelling or heat. Comparing wounds treated with your small efforts versus those handled with the usual routine. It's not a proper study, it's just observation. But already you wonder, and always the letter stays tucked in your notebook, folded and creased, but never far from reach. Because one day, the way things are done now may seem unthinkable, but for that to happen, someone has to start changing them. It is late morning when the knock comes, sharp, sure, and faster than usual. You glance at Morley, who's writing out a tincture recipe in his ledger, and he pauses just long enough to say, "That'll be Agnes." He stands, wiping ink from his fingers with a rag, and gestures for you to follow. Outside, on the step, stands a woman wrapped in a dark shawl, her face weathered by time and long hours, but her eyes sharp and clear. This is Agnes Porter, a midwife well known in the outer boroughs, respected by many, resented by a few, and tolerated, barely, by the city's more official physicians. She greets Morley with a nod, but her attention falls on you. "So this is the one you're training?" she says, folding her arms. "Looks young, but not soft at least." Morley smiles faintly, gesturing her inside. He's learning. That's what matters. Agnes sits at the edge of the surgery bench, not waiting to be asked. "I've got a case. A complicated one. Third birth, labour already begun, but there's a turn I don't like. Child's presenting oddly. I can handle most, you know that. But this one's tricky." Morley listens, his face unreadable. Then he glances at you. "Good opportunity for learning," he says. "If you're willing." You nod, already pulling on your coat. The walk is short but brisk, the streets busier than usual. Agnes doesn't speak much as you walk, but when she does, her words are quick and precise. "There are things you see in a birthing room that no anatomy text can teach," she says. "You learn to listen, not just to the mother, but the room itself, the rhythm of breath, the weight of silence." The house is small and quiet, tucked at the end of a row of brick cottages, smoke drifting lazily from the chimney. Inside, the air is close, warm, scented faintly with lavender and damp cloth. The labouring woman, a mother named Rose, lies in the centre room, her face pale but composed, hands clenched tight around the blanket beneath her. You take in the scene, the low lighting, the bowl of warm water, clean linens stacked neatly nearby. Agnes has prepared well. A younger girl, perhaps a sister, moves silently between tasks. The husband sits in the corner, silent, eyes wide with helplessness. Agnes moves to Rose's side, speaks softly to her, feels her belly with practised hands. She turns to you. "Feel here," she says. You place your hand carefully, guided by hers. Head's not where it should be. Breach, likely. She pauses, then continues. "We may need to assist manually if the child doesn't turn. Carefully, slowly. There's no rushing this. No instruments unless we've no choice." The hours that follow are slow and quiet, punctuated by whispered instructions and the soft rhythm of breath. Agnes works with calm assurance, her presence steadying the room. You observe her every movement, the way she speaks to the mother, the way she adjusts the mother's position, the way she watches for signs too subtle for your eye to catch. When the child begins to descend, Agnes acts quickly but gently. Her hands guide, support, encourage. You assist where asked, holding cloth, fetching water, helping reposition limbs when needed. The birth is not easy, but under Agnes's care it progresses. Finally, the room fills with the thin, unmistakable sound of a newborn's first cry, weak but real. The baby is wrapped and placed in the mother's arms. Rose is exhausted, barely speaking, but she nods faintly and manages a small smile. The father lets out a breath that sounds like he's been holding it for hours. You feel it too. Agnes tidies the space with the same care she showed throughout the process. She says little on the walk back, but before parting ways she places a hand on your shoulder. "Watch more than you speak," she says, "and don't ever forget, sometimes the best thing a doctor can do is not get in the way." Back in the surgery, Morley listens to your description of the birth with quiet attention. When you finish, he nods once thoughtfully. "There's more than one kind of knowledge," he says, "and not all of it comes from a book." You return to your notes that night, the candle burning low. You add a new section, one not filled with anatomical diagrams or surgical steps, but observations on breath, posture, silence, warmth, a kind of knowledge harder to measure, but no less important. And somehow, it feels like you're learning medicine all over again. It begins with a whisper in the street, a quiet mention that the fever is back. You hear it from the butcher's boy, who delivers packages to the surgery with hurried steps and eyes too wide for someone his age. Morley confirms it that evening over tea, placing a small newspaper clipping on the table. The article is brief, tucked between notices about church repairs and coal prices. Local hospital reports rise in typhoid and putrid sore throat. Residents advised to boil water. By morning the hospital has requested additional hands. Morley gives you the choice. You don't hesitate. When you arrive, a matron meets you at the front doors with a tired nod and leads you to the farthest wing of the building. A long corridor separated from the main wards by two heavy doors and a red cloth nailed above the entrance. You understand at once. Quarantine. Inside, the air is thick and warm, heavy with the unmistakable scent of fever. Sweet, sour, and damp. The windows are cracked just slightly, and flies drift slowly in the stale air. You're shown where to place your coat, then given a cotton apron and a bucket of vinegar solution to wash your hands. There is no running water in this part of the hospital. You do your best with what you're given. The fever ward is quiet, not because the patients are resting, but because many are too weak to speak. Some moan softly, others lie still, their skin flushed or pale, their bodies wrapped in sweat-dampened sheets. Nurses move slowly between beds, offering sips of water, changing compresses, whispering reassurances they hope will be heard. You follow one of them, a young woman named Alice, as she shows you how to fan a patient's face, how to lift someone gently to change the linens beneath them, how to spot the fine red rash that sometimes marks the throat just before breathing becomes more difficult. It's not glamorous work. It's not precise. There are no surgical instruments, no lectures, no diagrams, but it demands something else entirely. Patience, steadiness, and an unwavering presence in the face of helplessness. You keep track of temperatures, record the times of last meals, note when a patient is able to sit up, or when their eyes stop following your movement. These signs become your measures, your diagnostics. The attending physician visits once in the morning and once at dusk. He checks pulses, lifts eyelids, listens briefly to breathing with a brass stethoscope. His notes are brisk. He leaves quickly. The rest of the day belongs to the nurses and to you. Some patients recover. They sweat through the worst, begin to speak again, take bread and broth in small sips. Others do not. When a patient passes, the bed is stripped, the linens boiled, the frame scrubbed with carbolic. No prayers, no mourning, not in this room, only movement. On the fourth day, a boy no older than 16 grips your hand during the night. His fever has broken, but he cannot yet speak. You sit with him, reading aloud from a pocket copy of Robinson Crusoe, your voice low and steady. He listens, eyes half closed, and now and then you see the faintest hint of a smile. When Alice returns to check his bandages, she pauses, watching you from the doorway, then nods once before moving on. You begin to understand that not all medicine is about intervention. Sometimes it is about endurance, yours and the patient's, and the quiet, unspoken assurance that someone is present, noticing, remembering. When you return to the surgery at the end of the week, Morley asks what you've learned. You hesitate, then answer, "How to be still. How to sit beside someone even when you can't cure them." He gives a quiet nod and pours you tea. Later that evening, as you write in your notebook, you include no great revelation, no moment of brilliance, only small facts, fever patterns, breathing rates, ways to cool a patient without chilling them. But beneath the words, you record something else entirely, a kind of reverence for the simple work of care. It is not dramatic, it is not what most imagine when they speak of medicine, but it matters, and you now know how much. You've known it was coming. Every apprentice does. The moment you first entered Morley's surgery, the dissection room felt like an invisible landmark on the path ahead. It is not spoken of often, and when it is, the tone shifts, quieter, less certain, touched by something that lingers long after the formal learning ends. Today, that moment arrives. It begins with a letter from the hospital's anatomy instructor. A cadaver has become available, and your presence has been requested. Morley receives the notice with a short nod and says little more than, "You'll want a strong stomach and a steady hand." The dissection rooms are located below the hospital, where the stone corridors grow colder and narrower. The air shifts as you descend, cooler, drier, touched by something old. A faint, chalky odour clings to the walls, familiar but sharper than in any ward above. You pass through thick wooden doors into a long, quiet chamber, lit by high windows and rows of gas lamps. Wooden tables stand beneath them, each surrounded by shelves of labelled jars, bone saws, cloths, and anatomy texts. At the far end, the instructor stands waiting. A tall man with ink-stained cuffs and narrow eyes, he greets you with professional indifference. Several other students are already present, murmuring quietly, their expressions unreadable. You join them in silence. The body lies beneath a cloth, clean, pale, already prepared. The instructor lifts the cover with care, and what follows is not gruesome, not shocking, but still deeply human. The cadaver is that of a man in his late 30s, once broad of shoulder, now stilled in the stillness that is different from sleep. The instructor begins by describing the man's known history. Labourer, possibly injured, cause of death unknown. There is a formality to his voice, practised and deliberate, almost liturgical. The first incisions are simple, a long cut down the sternum, then outward. The body yields slowly as if reluctant to offer its secrets. Layer by layer the muscles are revealed, the textures and patterns you've only seen in diagrams now rendered in muted reds and greys. The lungs are darkened, the heart slack, the liver heavy. You make notes in the margins of your book, but part of your mind is elsewhere, tracing the man's imagined life, his work, his habits, what he might have eaten, where he walked, whether someone once waited for him to come home. The instructor shows you how to examine the intestines, how to differentiate tissues, how to handle a scalpel with just enough pressure. The scent is not as strong as you feared. Though formalin hangs faintly in the corners of the room, you grow used to it. You begin to notice things, subtle anatomical details, the quiet artistry of the human body, the patterns beneath the surface that all function depends upon. At times, your hand hesitates, not from fear, but from respect. The body is no longer a person, not in the way the patients upstairs are. But it is also not simply a thing. It is a lesson offered at great cost, and every movement of your blade carries the weight of that offering. There is talk too among the students about where the bodies come from. Not every cadaver is from the hospital. Some arrive through quieter means, unclaimed paupers, prison deaths, and sometimes worse. You've heard the rumours of grave robbing, of deals struck in the dead of night, of bags heavy with what should have remained buried. The instructors rarely confirm or deny it. They only say, "We take what we're given." You think of the man on the table and wonder if he knew he would end up here, if he agreed, if anyone in his life will ever know what became of him. It lingers with you, even as you record the angle of the femur, the breadth of the scapula, the texture of the stomach lining. When the session ends, the instructor thanks you all in that same even tone. The body's covered again, the room grows quiet, and each student departs in thoughtful silence. You linger a moment longer, watching the play of shadows across the cloth, the way the light falls through the high windows like thin smoke. Outside the day is bright, loud. The city continues without pause, unaware of the quiet room below where so many lessons remain hidden from view. You return to Morley's surgery carrying the weight of what you've seen, not in horror, but in reverence. And that night, As you write in your notebook, you include no sketches, no measurements, only a single line beneath the date. The body is the final teacher, and we are still learning how to listen. The patient is already seated when you enter the room, a man in his early 50s with a cough that rattles the ribs and eyes dulled by restless sleep. His wife hovers nearby, wringing the edge of her apron, whispering that he hasn't eaten for 2 days. She suspects bad blood, and so does Morley, or at least he pretends to. He listens with practiced patience, then opens the drawer and removes the box. You've seen it before. The phlegm and the lancets, all lined in neat rows, their edges catching the pale light. Beside them, the small brass bowl used to collect the blood, polished and worn with years of use. It's not the first time you've observed the practice, but today, for the first time, Morley places the lancet in your hand. "You've steady fingers," he says. "Best learn it properly." There is no hesitation in the room, not from the patient, not from the wife. Bloodletting remains trusted by many, especially for ailments like fever, cough, or heaviness of the limbs. It is thought to restore balance, to realign the humours, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, as Galen once taught, centuries before. You press the lancet to the inner bend of the arm, feel the faint give of the skin beneath it, and make the incision swiftly, just as you've seen. A thin line of blood arcs into the bowl, dark and slow-moving. The patient exhales softly, as if something inside has finally loosened. Morley watches, nodding slightly. "Enough for now," he says. "No need to weaken him." You clean the site with a cloth soaked in vinegar, wrap it gently, and hand the bowl to Morley, who examines the blood with a critical eye. "Dark," he murmurs, "but not thick. Could be worse." The man is helped to a cot near the window, and his wife whispers her thanks. You catch the look in her eyes, something like faith, and you wonder how much of healing is the medicine, and how much is simply being seen, being believed. Later that afternoon, Morley speaks more plainly. It won't do much, he admits, but it gives them something to hold on to, and sometimes that's enough. You ask him why the practice continues if it does little. He shrugs. "We don't have better, not always, and besides, there are worse treatments." You're beginning to realise how much of medicine in this time is balancing uncertainty. The science is still crude, the tools blunt, the causes of illness obscured by incomplete theories and invisible agents no one yet fully believes in. The best physicians, like Morley, are those who quietly question even as they conform, who do what they must while watching closely for what might come next. You start studying the theory behind bloodletting in the evenings. You read from Galen and Hippocrates, noting the ancient diagrams of bodily temperaments: sanguine, choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic. The words feel distant, preserved like fossils. Yet still they shape the way patients are treated, how doctors think. You learn which veins are bled for headaches, which for fevers, which for chest pain. You memorise them even as you begin to suspect that they are relics, soon to be shed. But there's also something deeply human in the ritual. The shared silence during the procedure, the tenderness of washing the wound, the quiet hope that follows. These are the things you carry back to your notes. The actions, yes, but also the atmosphere, the moment between illness and recovery where belief holds the heaviest weight. That night, in your dim room above the surgery, you write, "We drain blood not always to cure but to comfort, and perhaps there is a kind of healing in that, even if not the one we seek." The wind picks up outside. Somewhere down the lane a dog barks once and falls quiet. You sit by the candle a while longer, thinking of the blood in the basin, the look in the woman's eyes, and the strange in-between space you now occupy, between old and new, tradition and truth, shadow and discovery. The apothecary's room above the surgery smells like something ancient, sharp with dried herbs, heavy with oils, sweetened faintly by the scent of powdered roots. It is both a place of remedy and ritual, a cramped chamber of wooden drawers, dusty jars and handwritten labels curling at their corners. It has no windows, only a lamp hung from a hook in the ceiling, and the constant presence of quiet. Morley brings you up here on a wet afternoon, after a day of visiting homes damp with soot and illness. "Time you learned what we give," he says, "and what we don't." The shelf stretches from floor to ceiling, divided with painstaking care. Each bottle has its place, though their names vary, some in Latin, some in rough English, some half faded altogether. You run your finger along the labels. Tinctura opii, pulvis ipecacuanhae, aqua lauricerasi, unguentum hydrargyri. Morley watches, waiting. What do you know about laudanum, he asks. You recite what you've been taught. Opium dissolved in alcohol, widely used for pain, cough, sleeplessness, nervous distress, and even in teething mixtures for infants. He nods slowly. And do you know how often it kills? You pause. Not by violence, he says, but by quietness. A little too much, and the lungs forget to rise, especially in the very young, or the very tired. You begin to understand the apothecary shelf not as a collection of cures, but a narrow edge. Between relief and risk, between sedation and silence. Every bottle is a decision, every spoonful a wager. He shows you how to mix a syrup for cough. Licorice root, honey, paregoric in just the smallest measure. Enough to quiet it, not enough to dull the mind, he says. He weighs the powders with care, crumbles dried leaves between his fingers, grinds a bark into a coarse dust with a mortar as old as the city. You help him prepare a poultice next. Mustard seed and flour mixed with vinegar until it stings the nose. Good for drawing blood to the surface, he says. Sometimes it helps the lungs, sometimes not. But people expect warmth when they ask for medicine. They expect a sensation. One bottle you aren't allowed to touch. Mercury, thick and silvery in its vial, kept behind glass. Used for syphilis, he explains. A cure worse than the disease. It burns the gums, rots the teeth, and still we give it. He doesn't smile when he says it. The contradiction hangs heavy in the air. How so much of healing is trying, adjusting, hoping. There are few true remedies. Most of what sits on the shelf masks symptoms, soothes edges, buys time. And yet, in their own way, they matter. You read through Morley's older notebooks that evening, filled with formulations written in a careful, looping hand. Many of them are dated, some are crossed out, others annotated with notes like, better without opiate, or try with less alcohol next time. You see his doubt woven into the margins, his corrections, his evolving care. Even now he experiments in small ways, tweaking proportions, testing replacements. He gives you a recipe to copy out, a tonic for weakness, with gentian root and orange peel, a little bark, a dash of spirit. You write it out slowly, pausing between each line. When you ask if it truly helps, Morley shrugs. Sometimes. Enough that they feel steadier. That can be enough. You return to the shelf the next day, this time alone. You open the jars carefully, learning their scents by memory. The sharpness of camphor, the depth of cloves, the mustiness of valerian. You place each one back with quiet respect. And in your journal that night, you write not of cures, but of care, of intention, of the hands that measure and stir and wait. You write, perhaps we do not heal, not always, but we notice, we measure, we offer something in the waiting, and sometimes that is what the body needs. The lamp burns lower, and outside the rain finally stops. The city holds its breath between storms, and above the surgery the shelf stands still and silent, its rows of ancient hope ready for morning. The ward feels quieter now, yet the silence carries its own weight. Among the patients some speak little or not at all, their voices lost beneath fever, pain, or simply the exhaustion of days spent in unrelenting discomfort. You notice these individuals more closely, drawn to their stillness and the subtle signs they offer, twitch of a finger, flutter of an eyelid, the way they shift in bed when the sun moves across the window panes. One patient, a woman perhaps in her 30s, lies near the corner. Her eyes are closed, lips pale and cracked. She doesn't answer when spoken to. You wonder if she hears you at all, but you speak softly anyway, reading aloud from a worn volume of poetry borrowed from a kind visitor. The words float gently in the stale air, and though her face remains still, you imagine they reach some part of her. Another, a boy with a broken leg wrapped in rough linen, stares at the ceiling with wide, unblinking eyes. He has said nothing since admission, but you see his chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. You bring him water, cool his forehead with a damp cloth, and sit beside him, knowing that your presence may be the only comfort he has. The nurses tend these silent patients with quiet diligence, speaking in tones meant more to soothe themselves than the ones they care for. They change dressings, adjust pillows, wipe sweat from brows. Their hands are steady, their movements practiced. There is a rhythm here, a soft choreography that unfolds even in absence of speech. You find yourself learning a different language, the language of presence without words. A gentle touch, a careful repositioning, the way the room is kept cool or warm according to fragile needs. You realise that healing is sometimes not a battle won, but a fragile truce held between body and mind. One afternoon you sit beside the woman in the corner and quietly recite the lines again. Softly, in the dusk, a woman is singing to me. Her eyelids flutter, and for a moment her hand twitches. It is the smallest movement, but enough. You press your hand gently to hers. The moment passes, but it lingers in your memory, a fragile thread between silence and life. Back in the quiet of the surgery later, you write, "Not all patients speak their pain aloud. Sometimes they speak in silence, and we must learn to listen." Outside, the evening mist begins to gather, curling through the streets like a soft breath. The world moves on, unaware of the quiet lessons unfolding behind shuttered windows. The room is small and dimly lit by a single oil lamp, its flickering flame casting gentle shadows on the worn wooden floorboards. You step inside with measured steps, careful not to disturb the anxious stillness that holds the air like a thick fog. The midwife stands near the bed, her hands rough from years of labour and care, her face lined with both fatigue and fierce determination. A young woman lies on the bed, clutching the coarse sheets, her face pale with exhaustion but resolute. Childbirth in this era is a world apart from the other medicine you have witnessed. It is raw and intimate, a dance between life and death, hope and despair. No modern comforts exist here. No sterile rooms, no electric monitors, no anesthesia. Only the strength of the woman, the knowledge of the midwife, and the tools that fit in a small wooden box at the foot of the bed. You watch as the midwife cleans her hands in a basin of water that has been warmed over the hearth. There is no soap, only a cloth, and the sharp scent of herbs steeped in vinegar. She speaks softly to the labouring woman, her voice a steady presence amidst the rhythm of breathing and quiet groans. The delivery is long and difficult. You note the exhaustion in the mother's eyes, the tight grip of her hands, the beads of sweat that trace lines down her temple. You remind yourself that complications are common, hemorrhage, infection, obstructed labour, and that many will not survive. The midwife's knowledge is mostly passed down from generations before her, built on experience rather than science. Suddenly the baby's first cry pierces the room, a sharp, fragile sound that fills the space and seems to push back the shadows. The midwife wipes the infant's face, then gently wraps it in a rough cloth. The mother's relief is palpable, though it is tempered by the toll her body has taken. You help to elevate her legs and offer a cup of cool water. You learn that the next days will be just as perilous. The mother's body must heal, and the risk of infection looms large. The term childbed fever is whispered among the nurses, a mysterious and deadly illness that claims many women after childbirth, a scourge no one yet fully understands or knows how to prevent. The midwife tells you that cleanliness is vital, but water is scarce, and boiling linens is a luxury rarely afforded. You realise that even now many deaths could be avoided with simple measures that are still too new, too strange, or too difficult to implement. In this room, you witness both the miracle of birth and the fragile line it walks with mortality. The baby's cries echo in your mind long after you leave, a reminder that life and death are forever intertwined in the practice of medicine. That night, your journal holds a new entry. In every birth, there is hope, but also risk. We carry both with us, and must learn to tread carefully between them. Outside, the city carries on, its lights flickering softly through the mist, life quietly persisting in the cold summer night. The air in the hospital corridors is heavy tonight, thick with the smell of damp stone and lingering smoke from the lanterns. You walk slowly along the polished floorboards, the echoes of your footsteps mingling with distant coughs and the occasional whispered prayer. The world outside is quiet, wrapped in a gentle, indifferent darkness. But inside, life and death hover close, sometimes indistinguishably so. In this time, you've learned that illness is a mystery tangled in shadows. Diseases come and go, often with no clear cause. Many patients who arrive with injuries or fevers do not leave. You've begun to understand that it is not only the wounds or the illnesses themselves, but something unseen, something you cannot touch or measure, that claims lives. The concept of infection is still a whisper in the halls of medicine, unspoken by most. Germ theory lies far in the future, beyond the grasp of even the most learned minds here. The invisible agents that breed disease remain invisible, an idea so foreign it is easier to blame miasmas, bad air, or imbalances of humours. You watch Morley prepare his instruments, the same steel tools that have been used for countless surgeries and dressings, wiped with cloths but rarely boiled or sterilised. He cleans them with alcohol when he can, but alcohol is expensive and often reserved for patients thought to have the best chance of survival. The others receive what's available: rags, vinegar, sometimes nothing at all. The operating table itself is worn and scarred, its wood stained in patterns you try not to consider too closely. Before surgery, the patient is held down firmly, sometimes by several attendants, because without anaesthesia, even the faintest movement can be fatal. The agony is immediate and raw, and the air fills with shouts, gasps, and the rhythmic pounding of the surgeon's pulse. You recall reading accounts of surgeons whose hands shook, their brows slick with sweat, their eyes focused as much on controlling their own fear as on the precise cut they must make. The battlefield surgeons, you've learned, are often faster than their civilian counterparts, driven by urgency, but the risk remains immense. One small mistake, one contaminant introduced through a neglected tool or unwashed hand, and the patient's fate is sealed. In the ward you observe the slow, creeping onset of infection, the swelling, the redness, the foul-smelling discharge from wounds that seemed at first to be healing. The patient's faces twist with pain, their bodies growing weaker even as their spirits flicker dimly. The fever burns through their veins like wildfire, and few treatments exist beyond supportive care. Cool cloths, small doses of laudanum to ease the pain, and whispered prayers. You ask Morley if he has seen many survive these infections. His eyes grow distant. Not enough, he says quietly. Sometimes it's like fighting a shadow. One afternoon, you assist in cleaning the wounds of a young soldier whose leg was shattered in a recent skirmish. His skin is pale and clammy, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. As you prepare the bandages, you notice the darkening around the wound's edges, the angry redness creeping toward his thigh. Morley warns you quietly, this one may not make it. You see the toll taken not only on the body but on the soul. Families come and go, faces pressed against windows, clutching handkerchiefs, sometimes sobbing quietly in the hallways. The hospital is a place of hope and heartbreak intertwined. You remember your own hands, how they tremble as you reach for the tools, how you force yourself to wash them in cold water between patients, despite the chill. The knowledge is growing, uneven and slow, but it carries the weight of life. At night the hospital quiets, but your thoughts do not. You write in your journal by candlelight, "Infection is the unseen enemy. We cannot fight what we cannot see, but we can learn to prepare. The future may hold the key, but for now, we face the shadows with trembling hands." Outside, the wind sighs through the empty streets, carrying with it the cold promise of dawn. You sit alone, feeling the fragile thread of knowledge stretch taut between hope and despair, waiting for the day when light will chase away these shadows for good. Morning light filters softly through the dusty windows of the operating room, casting long shadows over worn wooden floors. You stand quietly beside Morley, watching as he prepares his tools with steady hands, the gleam of the scalpel reflecting the faint glow of the lamp. The room holds a weight, a quiet tension born from knowing the gravity of what is to come. In these times, surgery is a last measure, performed without the comfort of modern pain relief. The patient remains awake, aware of every movement, every sensation. You recall stories from the ward, of patients gripping tightly to the rough straps that hold them steady, of voices low with fear or firm with resolve. Today, a man with a broken arm lies waiting, his face pale but steady. The air is thick with anticipation. Morley gently cleans the arm with cloths dipped in vinegar, the sharp scent mingling with the quiet murmurs and the distant sounds of the waking city. As Morley makes the incision, you notice the careful precision of his movements, the calm focus in his eyes. The skin parts slowly, revealing muscle and tissue beneath. You see the effort it takes to set bone and repair damage, the careful hands working steadily even as the man's breathing grows shallow. The room is still except for the measured sounds of the procedure, punctuated by the soft rustling of cloth and the steady drip of blood onto the linen below. Outside, church bells toll gently. marking time as the operation continues. When it concludes, the patient is exhausted but alive. His eyes meet yours briefly. There is a flicker of gratitude and apprehension. You understand then that the surgeon's role is as much about courage and care as it is about skill. Morley speaks softly afterward, his voice low but steady. We use the scalpel only when necessary. Every cut carries weight. You nod, aware that each incision is a delicate balance between the hope of healing and the risk of harm. Later, as you write by candlelight, your words form quietly on the page. To hold the scalpel is to embrace both responsibility and humility. It is a reminder that healing often walks a fine line and that the outcome is never certain. Beyond the window, sunlight breaks through the clouds, casting a gentle glow over the city's rooftops. Life moves forward, slow, uncertain, and quietly resilient. The afternoon sun filters through the tall, narrow windows of the ward, painting soft patterns of light on the rough plaster walls. You find a moment to sit quietly by a bedside where a middle-aged man rests, his breathing shallow but steady. The room hums with a gentle stillness, broken only by the occasional shuffle of feet or the faint murmur of nurses tending to other patients. In these quiet hours, much of the work of healing unfolds unseen. The sharp interventions of surgery and the urgent ministrations of medicine give way to patience and watchfulness. You observe the small details, the cool cloth pressed to a fevered brow, the careful repositioning of pillows to ease aching muscles, the soft whisper of reassurance in a voice meant to comfort as much as to heal. You think about the many nights spent here, where the line between hope and despair is thin and shifting. You remember the patients who have come and gone, some recovered, many lost to the invisible enemies of infection and exhaustion. Each person leaves behind a trace, a memory of pain, resilience, and quiet courage. Morley moves through the ward with practiced care, checking on each patient, his presence steady and reassuring. You notice how he listens closely, not just to symptoms but to the subtle changes in colour, breath and expression. In this era, without the tools of modern science, the healer's senses are their most vital instruments. You feel a growing respect for the slow, patient art of nursing and care, the work that often goes unnoticed but forms the foundation of recovery. It is a reminder that healing is rarely immediate, but a process unfolding over time, carried on the backs of endurance and attention. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows, you sit quietly, absorbing the calm and the fragility of this place. Your journal awaits, and you write. Healing is a quiet journey, marked not by grand gestures but by the small acts of care, the watchful presence, and the hope held steady in the face of uncertainty. Outside, the city breathes in twilight, the distant sounds of life winding down for the day. Inside, the ward holds its fragile peace, waiting for whatever tomorrow may bring. As twilight deepens, the hospital settles into a hushed calm. The soft rustle of linen, the quiet footfalls of nurses making their rounds, and the distant tolling of a bell mark the passage of time in this sanctuary of fragile lives. You find yourself drawn to the importance of rest, a seemingly simple remedy, yet one of the most crucial and elusive in this era. You observe the patients nestled in their beds, their bodies heavy with exhaustion. Some sleep deeply, their faces softened by the slow descent into unconsciousness. Others lie awake, eyes tracing the dim outlines of the room, wrestling silently with pain or fear. Rest is not always easily found, but it is medicine of a kind, offering moments of reprieve and renewal. The absence of effective drugs to ease suffering makes the gentle comfort of stillness all the more vital. Nurses drape blankets carefully over chilled limbs, adjust pillows to cradle aching joints, and softly murmur words of reassurance. You notice how even the faintest noise or flicker of light can disturb the fragile balance of sleep, and so the ward is kept as quiet as possible. You think about how much healing relies on this delicate state, how the body's slow repair begins in the quiet hours when the mind can release its burdens. Without modern aids, rest itself becomes a small battle won, a precious resource to be protected. Morley pauses beside you, his eyes reflecting the weariness of the day. Sometimes, he says quietly, all we can do is wait and hope that the body knows what to do. You nod, feeling the truth in his words. The hands that mend can only guide. Much of recovery is entrusted to time and the mysterious rhythms of life. The faint scent of herbs, lavender, chamomile, drifts softly from a nearby bundle, brought by a thoughtful nurse to soothe restless patients. These small comforts ripple through the ward, a gentle reminder that even in hardship, kindness endures. As night deepens outside, you write slowly by candlelight. Rest is the silent healer, unseen but essential. In its quiet embrace, the body gathers strength, and hope quietly stirs. Outside the window, stars begin to prick the velvet sky, and the city slips into a gentle slumber. Inside, the ward remains a place where healing continues, slow and steady, carried on the breath of night. The night deepens around the hospital, wrapping the building in a cloak of quiet darkness that feels almost sacred. Inside, the atmosphere is thick with a different kind of weight, the heavy presence of desperation. You walk slowly through the dimly lit corridors, your footsteps softened by worn rugs and the muffled sounds of distant murmurs. Each door you pass hides a story of pain, fear, and fragile hope. You pause outside a small room where the air hangs heavy with the scent of sweat, herbs, and something sharper, an underlying tang of fear that lingers like a shadow. Inside lies a man whose life hangs by a thread, his breathing shallow, the pale sheen of cold sweat clinging to his brow. Around him, the nurses move with careful urgency, whispering among themselves, their faces drawn tight with worry. This is a moment you have come to know well, the moment when medicine shows its limits, and uncertainty settles like dust over everything. Despite all the knowledge, tools, and effort, the outcome remains fragile, precarious. You remember the countless times you have witnessed this same quiet battle, the struggle of bodies too weak, of wounds too deep, and of diseases still misunderstood. You think about the doctors and surgeons who came before, their hands stained with blood and doubt, trying desperate measures born of hope and frustration. The medicines available now are often no more than herbs, tinctures, and opiates that dull but do not cure. Surgery can save, but only when swift and careful. Otherwise, it risks inviting the unseen enemy of infection. Your mind drifts to the countless evenings spent at the bedside, holding a patient's hand, offering what comfort you can, feeling helpless but present. The room feels suspended in time, a fragile bubble where the boundary between life and death is thin and trembling. You reflect on the toll this work takes, not only on the patients but on those who care for them. Morley, once sharp and confident, now often carries a heaviness in his gaze, a quiet resignation tempered by stubborn hope. The nurses too wear invisible scars, the fatigue, the heartbreak, the endless repetition of grief and recovery. In the shadows you witness small acts of kindness, a gentle touch, a whispered word, a shared silence that speaks volumes. These moments of human connection seem to stand as a bulwark against the relentless tide of suffering. As dawn approaches, you sit by the flickering candlelight and write slowly in your journal, "In the depths of despair there is still courage, in the silent presence beside a suffering soul, in the small acts of care that defy the odds, and in the stubborn flicker of hope that refuses to be extinguished." Outside, the first light of morning begins to colour the sky in pale blues and pinks, promising a new day. Yet inside these walls the struggle continues, a quiet testament to the resilience of both the body and the spirit. The early morning sun casts long, golden beams through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drift lazily in the still air of the hospital. You find yourself wandering the quiet halls, where the echoes of footsteps and murmured conversations mingle with the distant clinking of glass and the faint rustle of linens. Here, amidst the solemnity of healing and loss, you confront the paradox that defines medicine in this era, the heavy burden of partial knowledge paired with profound ignorance. You think of the physicians and surgeons whose names are whispered with both reverence and frustration, men and women who have spent years studying anatomy, the workings of the body, and the effects of various treatments. Yet their understanding is incomplete, limited by the absence of key discoveries that will only come decades later. Germ theory remains elusive, and the invisible forces that spread infection are still mysteries, relegated to superstition or misinterpretation. In this moment, you stand beside Morley as he examines a patient whose fever has stubbornly refused to break. He speaks quietly, carefully balancing hope and caution. "We must trust observation," he says, "for without knowing the cause, we can only respond to the symptoms." His hands move gently, palpating the patient's abdomen, noting the sheen of sweat, the rapid pulse. You recall the array of treatments offered. Leeches to draw out bad blood, purgatives to cleanse the body, and various concoctions brewed from herbs and minerals. Some remedies are harmless, others potentially harmful, but all are attempts to wrest control from the chaos of illness. The trial and error nature of this medicine weighs heavily on the practitioners, who must choose between options with limited guidance. The hospital's library holds volumes of medical texts, some centuries old, others more recent, their pages filled with diagrams, theories and case studies. You browse these dusty tomes, marvelling at the earnestness of the authors who sought to understand the human body despite their limitations. Yet, even the most learned among them could not see beyond the framework of their time, and many of their treatments reflect that. Walking through the wards, you observe patients receiving care that ranges from attentive and skillful to rudimentary and experimental. You see the hopeful eyes of the sick, the steady hands of the healers, and the quiet suffering that permeates it all. The contrast between knowledge and ignorance creates a tension, an ongoing struggle to improve, tempered by the harsh reality of incomplete understanding. Morley confides in you that each case teaches something new, though progress is slow and sometimes painful. Medicine is as much about humility as it is about skill, he says. We learn from every success and failure. You realise that this paradox will persist until new discoveries break through the darkness, transforming fear into understanding. Until then, healing remains a careful balance of science, art, and hope. In your journal you write, "To carry knowledge without full understanding is a heavy burden, yet within this burden lies the seed of progress, a relentless pursuit to illuminate the unknown and bring relief to suffering." Outside, the city stirs awake beneath a sky streaked with pale light, and the hospital hums with renewed purpose. The day ahead holds challenges, but also the promise that each step forward, no matter how small, shapes the future of healing. As the day wanes, a quiet unease settles over the hospital. The golden light that once streamed through the windows now fades into a muted amber, and the air grows thick with a scent both familiar and unwelcome, the faint, persistent odour of illness and decay. You walk slowly through the ward, the soft shuffle of your footsteps mingling with the subdued sounds of breathing, coughing, and whispered prayers. You stop by a small group of patients, their faces pale and drawn, eyes clouded with fever and pain. In this era, the invisible enemy known as infection casts a long shadow, one that no surgeon's skill or physician's knowledge can fully dispel. The tools used to heal are themselves potential carriers of harm, and the understanding of germs and bacteria remains beyond reach, a secret waiting to be uncovered. You recall how instruments are often reused without thorough cleaning, their surfaces smeared with the residue of previous patients. Cloths are shared, hands washed only rarely, and the very air seems to carry unseen threats. Yet, there is no knowledge of antisepsis, no awareness of the microscopic world that spreads illness so efficiently. Instead, many attribute sickness to miasma, the corrupted air, or to imbalances in the body's humours. Morley moves among the beds, his face etched with concern. He applies poultices, changes dressings, and offers words of comfort. Yet beneath his calm demeanour, you sense a deep frustration, the knowledge that despite best efforts, many patients will succumb not to their original wounds, but to infection that silently invades. You think of the many stories you've heard, patients who survived the scalpel only to fall ill days later, wounds that seemed to heal but then turned red and swollen, fevers that rose and never abated. The hospital becomes a place where survival depends not only on skill, but on chance, resilience, and the slow workings of the body's own defences. Outside, the city carries on unaware, bathed in twilight. The distant clatter of carts and the murmur of voices seem to belong to another world, a world where the smallest, unseen dangers can have the greatest consequences. In the quiet moments, you consider the emotional toll this takes on the healers, the repeated losses, the helplessness in the face of invisible threats, and the thin line between hope and despair. Yet, despite this, there is a steadfast commitment to care, to try, and to keep faith in the possibility of recovery. As night deepens, you take your journal and write, "Infection is the silent adversary, unseen but relentless. It teaches humility to healers and patience to the suffering, reminding us that healing is not always immediate, and that sometimes the greatest battles are fought in the smallest spaces. The flicker of candlelight casts long shadows as the ward settles into uneasy rest. Beyond the hospital walls, stars begin to pierce the dark sky, silent witnesses to the fragile struggles within. The dawn brings a pale, hesitant light that filters softly through the cracked glass of the hospital windows, casting a gentle glow over the worn wooden benches and faded walls. You move slowly through the quiet ward, where patients lie wrapped in coarse blankets, their bodies marked by the trials of surgery, illness, and time. The air is cool but carries a faint warmth, as if the very atmosphere encourages healing. You observe the slow, often difficult path toward recovery that defines this time. Unlike the swift cures of later centuries, healing in the 1800s is measured in weeks and months, a gradual process of endurance and care. The body, weakened by injury and surgery, depends on the patience and vigilance of those around it. Morley stands beside a young woman recovering from a leg wound. His hands rest gently on the rough linen covering her, his gaze steady and watchful. He speaks softly to her, offering words that seem to carry both reassurance and quiet determination. You notice how much trust she places in him, a fragile bond formed amid uncertainty. You think about the many factors that influence recovery: the cleanliness of the ward, the patient's strength, the quality of food and rest, and the subtle interplay of hope and fear. Without antibiotics or advanced therapies, the body's own resilience is the greatest ally. Outside the window, birds begin their morning song, a delicate soundtrack to the slow unfolding of healing. The distant hum of the waking city reminds you that life continues beyond these walls, relentless and indifferent to suffering. In this long road, small victories are precious. The easing of pain, the quiet return of appetite, the gradual restoration of movement, all signs that the body is mending piece by piece. You recognize the weight of these moments, the hope they kindle in patients and caregivers alike. As you sit to write by the flickering candlelight, you capture the essence of this slow journey. Recovery is a gentle, persistent tide, shaped by endurance and care. It asks for patience and faith, and rewards with the quiet promise of renewed strength. The hospital breathes with the steady rhythm of healing, fragile, imperfect, but unyielding. Outside, the world awakens to a new day, and within, the journey toward wholeness continues, one slow step at a time. As the sun dips low, casting a soft amber glow through the hospital's tall windows, you feel the quiet stillness settle deeply within the ward. The hushed murmur of voices has faded, replaced by an almost reverent silence, broken only by the faint rustling of linen and the distant footsteps of a lone nurse making her evening rounds. In this calm, you become acutely aware of the weight of isolation that patients often carry in these walls. You stand beside a small bed where a young man lies, his face pale and marked by days of fever and confinement. He is separated from his family, many miles away, with no modern means of communication or easy visitation. The loneliness is palpable, not just a physical separation, but an emotional and mental distance that deepens the hardship of illness. In the 1800s, hospitals are often places of last resort, and for many the experience is as much about enduring solitude as it is about confronting pain or uncertainty. You notice how the absence of loved ones leaves a silent void, one that no medicine or care can fully fill. Patients find themselves surrounded by strangers, their fears and hopes held quietly within themselves. Morley, aware of this invisible burden, offers gentle words and occasional smiles, small gestures meant to bridge the gulf. He understands that healing is not only a physical process but one deeply entwined with the spirit. You watch as he lingers a moment longer by the bedside, his presence a balm amid the quiet loneliness. You consider the role of community in recovery, a stark contrast to the often isolating environment of the hospital. In villages and homes, families tend the sick with touch, familiar voices, and shared stories. Here, the sterile walls and routine care can feel cold and impersonal, no matter how well intended. Yet, even in this space of solitude, small moments of connection emerge. A nurse's soft song, a whispered prayer, the warmth of a hand briefly held, all become threads woven into the fragile fabric of healing. You write in your journal as candlelight flickers. Isolation is a silent companion to illness, a quiet challenge that tests the spirit as much as the body. Yet, within this solitude, the smallest acts of kindness carry profound power. Outside, dusk deepens into night, and the hospital settles into a hushed rhythm. Within its walls, the invisible weight of loneliness remains, but so does the enduring hope carried by those who dare to heal and be healed. The night deepens, and the hospital's corridors are cloaked in shadows, broken only by the faint glow of oil lamps. You wander quietly through the rooms, where flickering light plays on whitewashed walls and wooden beds. Here, in this twilight realm between darkness and dawn, you sense the fragile boundary between emerging medical science and the lingering hold of superstition. You observe how medicine in the 1800s is a mosaic, part empirical study, part inherited belief. Doctors like Morley work diligently, drawing on the latest anatomical texts and clinical observations, yet many treatments remain rooted in centuries-old ideas that intertwine with cultural fears and folklore. It is a time when the mysterious and the rational coexist uneasily, shaping how illness is understood and treated. You recall the prevailing ideas of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile and yellow bile, believed to govern health and temperament. Imbalances were thought to cause disease, and treatments aimed to restore harmony, sometimes through drastic means like bloodletting or purging. Though often misguided by today's standards, these methods were serious attempts to make sense of suffering in a world where so much was unknown. You also notice the persistence of superstition. Talismans warned to ward off evil spirits, prayers whispered over the sick, and a deep fear of contagion explained through moral or spiritual failure rather than microscopic pathogens. Such beliefs offer comfort but can also impede progress, shaping both patient expectations and doctor decisions. Morley, aware of these tensions, strives to balance respect for tradition with cautious adoption of new ideas. He listens patiently to patients' fears, understands their need for ritual, and yet encourages rational care whenever possible. The path forward is uncertain, marked by slow, often contested change. Walking the halls, you feel the weight of this transitional era, a time when the veil between old and new begins to lift, yet shadows remain. It is a delicate dance, one that requires both humility and courage. You write thoughtfully in your journal. Medicine is a bridge between worlds, built on fragile foundations of knowledge and belief. It carries the hope of healing, even as it struggles to shed the shadows of the past. Outside, the night sky stretches vast and silent, a canvas of stars that witness the unfolding story of human endeavour, the quest to understand, to heal, and to find light in the darkness. The first light of dawn barely touches the horizon, as you find yourself in the quietest corner of the hospital's lecture room. The air here is cool and still, filled with the scent of aged wood and ink-stained pages. This is a place where knowledge is shared, debated, and sometimes fiercely contested. It is here that the seeds of medical innovation begin to take root, nurtured by courage, curiosity, and the willingness to challenge long-held beliefs. You watch as Morley and a small group of colleagues pore over detailed anatomical sketches and surgical notes. Their faces are tense but hopeful, reflecting the weight of responsibility and the spark of discovery. They discuss recent experiments, novel procedures, and the subtle signs that may herald new understanding. This is the frontier of 19th century medicine, a world where each step forward is hard-won. Despite the constraints of their time, these pioneers dare to question traditions that have persisted for centuries. They test new methods of wound care, explore ways to reduce pain, and grapple with the puzzling causes of infection. It is a slow, painstaking process filled with trial and error, but each small breakthrough brings the promise of improved outcomes. You sense the personal cost of this endeavour, the long hours, the repeated failures, and the skepticism they often face from both peers and society. Yet their commitment is unwavering. Morley's eyes gleam with a mixture of determination and weariness, as he shares a tentative hope about a new technique that might prevent post-surgical infections. You imagine the courage it takes to stand on the edge of the unknown, to push against the tide of convention, and to hold fast to the belief that healing can be better. It is a courage born not of certainty, but of faith in progress and compassion for those who suffer. In your journal you write, "Innovation is the quiet act of bravery, the willingness to question, to endure failure, and to envision a future where pain is lessened and lives are saved. It is the heartbeat of progress." Outside, the city awakens beneath a sky streaked with soft pink and gold, a new day full of possibility. Inside the hospital, the journey toward better medicine continues, fragile, uncertain, but unstoppable. The hospital is quiet now, bathed in the gentle light of a late afternoon sun filtering through dusty windows. You walk slowly along the familiar corridors, each step echoing softly on the creaking wooden floorboards. This place, with its worn beds and faded walls, holds countless stories of struggle and hope, failure and discovery. You feel the weight of those stories pressing softly around you, as if the very air remembers each whispered prayer and quiet farewell. You pause before a small cluttered desk where Morley carefully examines a fragile piece of paper, an early study perhaps, a glimpse into the mysteries of disease and infection. The language is cautious, tentative, but the meaning is clear. Understanding is beginning to take shape. Germs, invisible and unknowable just years before, are becoming a subject of intense curiosity and investigation. The shift from superstition and guesswork to observation and evidence is slow, marked by resistance and doubt. But you see it in Morley's eyes, the flicker of excitement, the deepening resolve. It is the dawning of a new era, one where the unseen world of microbes will finally be recognised as central to healing. As you move through the ward, you notice subtle changes, the increasing emphasis on cleanliness, the careful washing of hands, the cautious sterilisation of instruments. These small acts, once unusual or even frowned upon, are now gaining ground. They represent a fragile but crucial turning point, a step toward protecting patients from the invisible threats that have haunted hospitals for centuries. You reflect on the human stories behind these changes, the doctors who risked ridicule to speak of germs, the patients who survived when others did not, the nurses who embraced new practices despite skepticism. Each is a thread in the complex tapestry of progress. You write in your journal, feeling the slow shift of time beneath your pen. Understanding grows like dawn breaking over a dark landscape, gradually, hesitantly, but with a light that promises clarity and hope. The journey is long, but each step forward reshapes the future. Outside, the sun sinks low, painting the sky in hues of rose and amber. Within the hospital, the quiet work continues, a testament to perseverance, curiosity, and the enduring human spirit. The hospital grows still as twilight deepens into night, the last rays of sun slipping away behind distant rooftops. The soft glow of lanterns and candles casts flickering shadows on the worn stone walls, lending a quiet, almost sacred atmosphere to the place where so many have faced pain and uncertainty. You stand near a window, looking out over the sleeping city, feeling the weight and the warmth of countless stories carried within these walls. This is a place shaped by struggle and hope, where the courage of those who dared to heal in the face of ignorance has paved the way for the future. You think of the doctors, nurses, patients, and families whose lives intersected here, each one a vital thread in the unfolding story of medicine. Though the 1800s brought many challenges, painful surgeries without anaesthesia, instruments stained by use and rarely cleansed, and a world unaware of the germs that lurked unseen, these trials sparked determination and change. The efforts to ease suffering, to learn from mistakes, and to push beyond the limits of knowledge formed a foundation upon which modern medicine would be built. You feel a profound respect for those who worked tirelessly in the shadows, often unrecognised, driven by a simple desire to relieve pain and save lives. Their legacy is not just in textbooks or discoveries, but in the enduring human commitment to care. As you close your eyes for a moment, imagining the soft murmur of the hospital settling into rest, you hold this thought. The past is a quiet teacher, revealing the price of progress and the strength of compassion. Every step forward honours those who came before, whose hands and hearts shaped the path to healing. The night deepens, and beyond the window stars begin to twinkle, silent witnesses to the endless journey of human hope, resilience, and care. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the world of 1800s medicine, the hardships, the hopes, and the quiet courage of those who cared when knowledge was still unfolding. As you settle deeper into comfort, let your mind drift gently from the past to your own peaceful present. Imagine the soft glow of candlelight fading, the steady rhythm of quiet breaths, and the calm embrace of rest. May your sleep be deep and restorative, carrying you safely until morning light.